Chapter 1. Damon Silvershade sprinted through the stretch of pine and cedar, paws pounding on the soft earth as the new sun gilded his fur with a golden hue. In wolf form, he relished the crisp air filling his lungs. This early run was his ritual, a moment to savor the unity between nature and beast. As alpha, he carried the responsibilities of an entire pack, yet during these precious minutes, he allowed himself the simple bliss of freedom. Near the pack house, he shifted smoothly and stood tall, rolling out the tension in his shoulders. A couple of wolves from the night patrol approached, dipping their heads in deference. "Any problems out there?" Damon asked, his tone brisk but warm. "None, Alpha," one patrol member replied. "Borders are quiet and the new scouting routes seem to deter any stray rogues." "Good," Damon said, offering a nod. "Grab some breakfast before you crash." Sunshine streamed into the large, rustic building they called home. Thick beams, hewn from nearby trees, supported the lodge-like structure. Inside, the clatter of plates mixed with easy laughter, a comforting blend of family and camaraderie. The sense of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee made Damon's stomach rumble in anticipation. He spotted Seraphina stormbound at the far end of the main room. Even from across the space, his heart kicked at the sight of her. She wore a soft blouse and casual jeans, long black hair tumbling in gentle waves, and as usual, she was deep in conversation with a small group of pack members. They hung on her every word, clearly savoring her gentle guidance. When Seraphina noticed Damon, her green-gold eyes lit up. She excused herself and walked over to him, stepping lightly across the timber floor. "You look ready for a second run," she teased, eyeing his still rapid breathing. "Had to outrun my own thoughts," he joked, leaning down to press a swift kiss to her temple. "But I'll slow down for you." Her laugh was bright with affection, and it reminded Damon of why he led with such confidence, because beside him stood a mate who believed in him completely. Together they surveyed the bustling pack house, contentment flowing between them like an unbreakable bond. That afternoon, the pack house buzzed with anticipation for the upcoming celebration. Tables were being arranged in the open courtyard, strung lights hung from the wooden beams, and a steady hum of planning drifted through the hallways. Friendly voices called out instructions, ensuring every detail was handled before dusk arrived. At the edge of the courtyard, Damon and Seraphina discussed the final arrangements for the feast. A soft breeze carried the promise of a perfect evening. Clear skies, good food, and a gathering to strengthen ties with their neighboring pack. "I can't wait to see the looks on their faces when they taste Aunt Rita's honey-glazed roast," Seraphina mused, scanning the checklist in her hand. "Or when they see this unstoppable team we've built," Damon added. "The Crescent Moon Pack is stronger than ever thanks to our alliance. And you," Seraphina smiled. "You do realize I'm just the background force, right? You're the alpha, and a pretty amazing one." He reached out, tucking a lock of her hair behind her ear. "We lead together, love. Don't forget that." A sudden voice cut in. "I can't believe you're both out here talking about food while there's still so much left to arrange." The speaker was Rosalind, Seraphina's longtime friend and one of the highest-ranked betas. Her quick grin, however, took any sting out of her words. She approached with a clipboard of her own, shooting Damon a beam of appreciation that lingered a moment too long before turning to Seraphina. "I've got the tent for the visiting alpha sorted," Rosalind reported. "And the dance floor area is coming along, but we still need a few extra seats." Seraphina gave an approving nod. "Great, you've saved us a lot of time." Rosalind's gaze drifted back to Damon. "Anything you need me to handle, Alpha? I'm here to help with whatever." Damon exchanged a look with Seraphina, who offered a polite smile. "Nothing specific at the moment," he said, "but we appreciate your initiative." Rosalind's smile broadened, though her eyes glinted with something like ambition. Seraphina noticed, but pushed the thought aside. It was probably just Rosalind's excitement about the event. Still, a faint tingle of unease settled in Seraphina's stomach. She couldn't place it, but it was there. Before Seraphina could delve deeper into that feeling, a younger pack member jogged over with a small crisis about table placements, and Rosalind rushed off to handle it. Damon shifted closer, letting his hand graze the small of Seraphina's back. "We've come a long way," he said quietly, glancing across the courtyard where wolves worked in harmony. Sometimes. I think about the future. About the day we might announce some big news. You know, pup news. A flush warmed Seraphina's cheeks, her eyes shining with a tender glow. If we did, our family would have an incredible life here, surrounded by so many who care, and that includes some individuals who might act overprotective. Damon let out a low chuckle. Let them try. A future stormbound Silvershade pup would have the entire pack's devotion. Seraphina's heart fluttered at the idea. She pressed a kiss to Damon's shoulder, inhaling his comforting scent. We'll talk more about it soon. They shared a moment of quiet contentment, the kind that spoke of a deep bond. A hush fell over them, as if the outside world paused to allow them this small slice of paradise. Then a call from across the yard reminded them of their duties. We'd better get back before they string the lights in the wrong spots, Damon said with a grin. Definitely, Seraphina agreed, turning hand in hand with him to supervise the final touches. The sun descended, casting long shadows over the pack's territory. In just a few hours, the courtyard would be alive with music, dancing, and celebration. For now, Damon and Seraphina shared a comforting sense of optimism, unaware that, in the nights to come, their unshakable union would face more challenges than they ever imagined. Torches lined the courtyard, flames dancing gracefully in the evening air. Music drifted among tables laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, and fragrant fruit. The Crescent Moon pack moved as one, sharing laughter, clinking glasses, and greeting guests with warm smiles. It was a celebration of peace and unity, an event to honor the treaty they'd recently secured with a neighboring pack. Seraphina stood with Damon at the center of it all, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. Looking around, she felt a sweet rush of pride. Wolves in their finest attire spun in pairs, their steps syncopated to the drumbeat. Soft ribbons and lanterns hung overhead, casting an amber glow that made everything appear a little magical. You've really outdone yourself, Damon said, leaning in so she could hear him over the music. The entire pack helped, Seraphina replied, spotting the younger members darting about, offering sweet pastries to guests. I just coordinated. He turned to face her. I recognize your touch in the details, love. His voice held a teasing warmth, the sort that always made her heart feel lighter. Before she could respond, a figure stepped between them. Rosalind. The beta flashed an eager grin at Damon. Alpha, one of the elders has a question about seating arrangements. Do you have a minute? She paused, glancing at Seraphina. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Everything going well for you, Sarah? Caught off guard by the intrusion, Seraphina forced a polite nod. It's fine. Damon, I'll be right over by the refreshments when you're done. Their eyes locked in a silent exchange. Damon's brow creased with unspoken apology, but he turned to follow Rosalind. For the rest of the opening ceremony, Seraphina noticed that Rosalind stayed very close to him. Every time Seraphina considered pulling Damon aside, Rosalind somehow managed to steer him elsewhere, meeting visitors, checking on decorations, or answering trivial questions. An uneasy feeling settled at the back of Seraphina's mind. Rosalind's eyes flicked over to the pack's shaman, who lingered near the edge of the gathering. He was an older man with sharp features, and though his expression revealed little, there was a tense set to his shoulders whenever Rosalind approached. Seraphina tried to shrug off the apprehension, telling herself that Rosalind simply wanted to make sure the celebration ran smoothly. Yet there was an unspoken tension in the air, and Seraphina couldn't help wondering if it was more than standard party stress. Still, the rest of the pack seemed oblivious to any drama. Couples laughed as they spun in circles. Elders shared toasts, and children raced around chasing the glowing fireflies. Damon eventually found his way back to Seraphina, brushing a kiss across her cheek. Everything okay? He asked softly. Yes, I think so. She decided not to mar the evening with her suspicions. Let's just enjoy tonight. He rested a hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the musicians. With a sigh of relief, she melted into his embrace for a dance, their steps in perfect sync, hearts beating in tandem. Rosalind's watchful stare remained, though, a detail that lingered at the edge of Seraphina's awareness. As the night progressed, the crowd began to thin, Children nodded off, carried away by parents, while the older wolves continued to chat over the last plates of food. The moon cast a gentle glow across the courtyard, highlighting patches of grass where a few stragglers slow danced to quieter tunes. Serafina excused herself to fetch a pitcher of lemonade from the packhouse kitchen. On her way, she passed a narrow corridor leading toward the shaman's small chamber. Voices caught her ear, low, urgent tones. She paused, turning her head just enough to pick out Rosalind's distinct accent. "It has to be done soon," Rosalind said. The shaman's reply was muffled, but she heard the words, "vial of herbs." "Yes, those. I need them," Rosalind insisted. "Don't fail me. I'm counting on—" A floorboard creaked under Serafina's foot. She inhaled sharply as Rosalind stopped speaking. The beta appeared around the corner, tension in her posture, but her expression flipped into something casual when she recognized Serafina. "Oh, I was just getting some healing herbs for a minor cough," Rosalind blurted, gesturing vaguely at the door behind her. "You know, the shaman, always so protective of his stash." Serafina managed a smile, though her pulse beat faster. "Of course. Are you feeling under the weather?" "Nothing serious," Rosalind replied breezily. "Just a precaution. I'll see you out there, okay?" Rosaline brushed past Serafina, heading back toward the courtyard. The shaman remained out of sight, the door closed. Serafina stood in the corridor for several moments, sorting through what she'd heard. She couldn't remember a time when Rosaline had kept anything from her, yet the beta clearly didn't want her overhearing that conversation. Shaking off the creeping unease, Serafina rationalized that Rosalind had every right to speak privately with the shaman. Maybe it really was for some mild health concern. She forced herself to move along, retrieving the lemonade and joining the last part of the celebration. Damon was seated with a few pack members, engaged in easy banter. When he saw her, a tender grin curved his mouth, and he motioned for her to sit by his side. Still, an odd feeling clung to her thoughts, an odd doubt she rarely experienced. As she took her place next to her mate, she decided not to mention Rosalind's secrecy. The pack was enjoying a peaceful gathering, and Serafina didn't want to shatter the mood. Yet, as dawn inched closer, a subtle warning nipped at the edges of her mind, telling her that what she overheard might be more than a simple misunderstanding. Transition. When the last of the dancers left the courtyard and the torches dimmed, Serafina looked over at Rosalind, talking to Damon by the door. Her friend laughed at something he said, but Serafina caught a hint of tension in Rosalind's tight smile. The night ended on a pleasant enough note, yet Serafina fell asleep with an uneasy sense that their perfect world was about to change. The air was cool and crisp as the Crescent Moon pack gathered just outside the pack house for their evening run. The moon hung high above, casting its silver glow over the vast forest stretching endlessly into the night. Damon Silvershade stood at the front of their small group, his strong figure silhouetted by the moonlight, his senses already sharp, attuned to every sound in the woods. Beside him was Serafina, her hand lightly brushing his as they prepared to shift. "Are you ready, love?" Damon asked, his voice soft but steady. Serafina's lips curved into a teasing smile. "You know I'm always ready. I'd never let you outpace me." Damon chuckled, his breath coming out in a soft puff of air. He loved how confident she was, how fiercely she challenged him, even when it came to running. The light-hearted banter between them had become a familiar, comforting rhythm in their relationship. As the pack shifted into their wolf forms, the sound of paws meeting the forest floor was almost musical. The group broke into a run, the wind brushing against their fur, the thrill of the chase intoxicating. Serafina's wolf, sleek and agile, easily kept up with Damon, her silver fur glinting under the moonlight. She could feel his presence beside her, strong, sure, and a little possessive in the way he moved, always keeping an eye on her as they ran. Rosalind, their beta, lagged behind for a moment before shifting into her wolf form as well, moving with graceful power, her dark fur blending seamlessly with the shadows of the forest. She, too, was part of this patrol, keeping an eye on the boundaries of their territory as they ran. "Race you to the clearing," Serafina challenged Damon, her eyes bright with playful defiance. He shot her a sly grin before surging forward with a burst of speed. "You're on!" With a laugh, Serafina gave chase, her legs pumping, her heart beating wildly as she pushed herself to match Damon's pace. The sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, the snap of twigs, mingled with their laughter, and for a moment everything felt perfect. There was no worry, no tension, just the exhilarating freedom of running under the night sky, with her mate at her side. It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, Serafina was enjoying the thrill of the chase, her heart full of joy as she kept pace with Damon, the wind rushing past her, and the next, chaos erupted. A guttural growl split the night air, sending a jolt of unease through her. Damon's body went rigid, and Serafina immediately shifted her focus, her senses sharpening. Out of the shadows, rogue wolves appeared, large, vicious, and hungry for a fight. There were at least 5 of them, their eyes glowing with malice. The night, which had been filled with the laughter of wolves enjoying their freedom, was now consumed by the snarls and growls of a pack under attack. Damon let out a deep, commanding growl, instantly taking charge of the situation. "Defensive positions," he barked, his voice carrying the authority only an alpha could possess. The pack responded immediately, falling into formation. Serafina's instincts kicked in, her wolf agile and quick, positioning herself near Damon as they prepared to face the incoming threat. But something wasn't right. These rogues weren't acting like random attackers. They were coordinated, working together in a way that suggested a much darker intent. Damon and Serafina leaped into the fray, their combined strength and agility a force to be reckoned with. Every swipe, every bite, every movement was fluid and seamless. Until it wasn't. A rogue, larger than the others, lunged at Damon from the side, sinking its teeth deep into his shoulder. The sound of ripping flesh filled the air. Serafina's blood ran cold as Damon let out a strangled roar of pain. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rushed to his side, her eyes wild with panic. Her wolf wanted to tear into the rogue who had dared to harm her mate, but Damon's sharp command cut through the frenzy. "Stay back," he growled, his voice laced with pain but also authority. "Focus on the others." Serafina hesitated for only a second before redirecting her attention to the other rogues, her sharp claws slashing through the night. But a terrible sense of dread crawled up her spine, one that she couldn't shake. It wasn't just the rogue attack. It was something more. There was a darkness in the air, an energy that seemed to be pulling at her, and it centered around Damon. As the battle raged on, Serafina couldn't help but notice Rosalind standing on the edge of the fight. Her eyes were narrowed, her stance calm, almost too calm, as she observed the chaos unfolding. Serafina's gut twisted uncomfortably. Rosalind had always been fierce in combat, always part of the front lines, but tonight she was holding back, standing apart. And that was when Serafina saw it. Something small, almost invisible in the low light, but there nonetheless. Rosalind was holding something in her hand, something that shimmered faintly, a vial perhaps, or some kind of strange artifact. Serafina's instincts screamed at her. Rosalind wasn't just standing back, she was waiting for something. Before Serafina could make sense of what was happening, Damon howled in pain, the sound filled with raw agony. She turned, her heart breaking, and saw him collapse onto the ground, the rogue's claws still embedded in his flesh. But it wasn't just the rogue's attack. There was something more. Serafina's chest tightened, panic surging through her as an unseen force pressed down on Damon, intensifying his injuries. His eyes locked onto hers, wide with shock and pain. "Serafina." His voice was strained, the power in his alpha command weakened by whatever was happening to him. She barely registered the rogue she'd been fighting, too focused on her mate. Rosalind was still standing there, her eyes narrowed, a satisfied gleam in them that Serafina couldn't fully comprehend. That was when the truth hit her. This was no random attack. This wasn't just a rogue pack out for blood. This was sabotage. And it was aimed at Damon. Tears blurred Serafina's vision as she rushed to Damon's side, but the force holding him down seemed to intensify, as though some invisible hand was squeezing the life from him. His breath came in short, sharp gasps as he struggled to rise, his body betraying him. The alpha in him was fading under the weight of whatever magic Rosalind had unleashed. "Damon!" Serafina cried, her voice a mix of fear and desperation as she tried to pull him up, her claws slashing through the air. But it was as if an invisible force was pushing her away. Everything inside Serafina screamed for her to act, to do something. But her mate, the one she would do anything to protect, was slipping away from her, and there was nothing she could do. The fight raged on around them, but all Seraphia could hear was Damon's labored breath and the frantic pounding of her heart. The pack was strong, but for the first time, Seraphia wasn't sure if that strength would be enough to save him. The moon above them, once full and bright, now seemed distant, indifferent to the battle below. All she could think was, how had things gone so terribly wrong? The world seemed to tilt and warp around Serafina as she knelt by Damon's side, her hands shaking violently as she cradled his head. His breath was shallow, each exhale a rasping sound that sent a sharp stab of fear through her chest. His once proud, commanding presence now felt fragile, broken. The vibrant energy of the alpha who had led their pack with such strength and conviction was fading, slipping through her fingers like sand. "Damon, please, don't leave me," Serafina whispered, her voice hoarse with desperation. She could feel the pulse of his life slowly weakening against her touch, and it sent a shiver of cold panic through her veins. His eyes were barely open, his pupils dilated, and he seemed so far away, as though he were drifting into some distant, unreachable space. His lips parted, and his voice was strained, barely more than a whisper. "Sera, I'm sorry." His words were broken, filled with pain and sorrow, and her heart cracked at the vulnerability she saw in him. She shook her head quickly, refusing to accept his apology. "No. Don't. You'll be fine. You're strong, Damon, you always are," she said, her voice trembling as she pressed his head to her chest, feeling the raggedness of his breath as his body trembled in her arms. "We'll fix this. Just stay with me, please." Damon's hand, heavy and limp, reached for hers, his fingers brushing against her skin. His grip was weak, but it was enough to make her gasp, a fleeting connection that made her heart ache. His lips curled into a ghost of a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I love you," he whispered, the words so raw, so final, as though he was preparing to say goodbye. "No!" Serafina's voice cracked as she clutched him tighter, her heart racing. She couldn't let him go, not like this, not when they had so much ahead of them. Her mind raced, trying to think of a solution, something, anything, that would stop the darkness creeping into his body. "Stay with me, Damon, please. Don't leave me, not now." A figure appeared beside them, casting a long shadow over Serafina as she held Damon in her arms. Rosaline, her face unreadable, knelt down beside them with her usual calm demeanor, though something glinted in her eyes, a coldness that Serafina didn't quite recognize at first. "Let me help," Rosalind said, her tone soft but insistent. "I'll go get the pack shaman. He'll know what to do." Serafina barely registered her words. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Damon, her mind screaming at her to do something, anything. But she felt so helpless. Her fingers were coated in his blood, her heart slamming in her chest as she tried to stop the wound from worsening, her efforts futile against the severity of the injury. "No," Serafina said, her voice tight with panic. She looked up at Rosalind, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and confusion. "You don't understand. I can't lose him. I can't." Rosalie's expression softened, her hand coming to rest on Serafina's arm in a gesture that was almost too gentle. "I'll be quick," she said, her voice smooth, her eyes flickering briefly to the shaman's quarters in the distance. "You can't help him like this. I'll bring him back, I promise." Serafina wanted to scream at her, to tell her to stay away, to demand that she be the one to help, but the sight of Damon's crumpled form in her arms, the terrible weight of helplessness pressing down on her, made her freeze. There was a part of her that knew Rosalind's offer was the only option, but it still felt like a betrayal. Why wasn't she standing with them? Why was she leaving them now? Rosalind stood up and started walking toward the pack house, her movements efficient and measured. Serafina watched her, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Was it relief or something else? The unease she'd felt earlier, something that had clung to her every time Rosalind got too close to Damon, burned hotter now, but Serafina couldn't afford to dwell on it. She had to focus. Damon needed her. Gently, she lowered Damon's head to the ground, trying to keep him comfortable, even as she was consumed by terror. Her hands shook as she brushed the damp strands of hair away from his forehead, her fingertips brushing his skin, so warm, so alive, but barely. "You're not leaving me," she whispered fiercely, her voice breaking with every word. "Not now. Not like this." Damon's chest heaved with effort as he struggled to hold on, his eyelids fluttering closed for a brief moment before he forced them open again, his gaze landing on her. It was faint, but there was something in the depths of his eyes that made Serafina's chest tighten. "Sarah," Damon rasped, his voice strained. "You're my everything." A shudder ran through Serafina at the weight of his words. She leaned down to kiss his forehead, pressing her lips to his skin as tears filled her eyes. "And you're mine. You'll stay with me. I won't let you go. I can't." The sound of hurried footsteps reached her ears, followed by the familiar shape of Rosalind returning with the pack shaman in tow. His presence was commanding, though his face was lined with worry, his hands already reaching for Damon's injury. Serafina stepped back slightly to allow the shaman to work, her heart racing in her chest. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Damon, could barely breathe as the shaman muttered quietly under his breath, his hands glowing with the faint light of healing magic. Rosaline, standing just behind the shaman, watched silently, her face a mask of calm. "He'll survive," the shaman said, his voice steady but his eyes shadowed with concern. "But he'll need time." Serafina's breath hitched, relief flooding her so swiftly she almost collapsed. She grabbed the shaman's arm, her hand still trembling. "How long? How much time?" The shaman met her gaze, his brow furrowing. "It depends, but the danger has passed. He's strong. He'll recover." Serafina nodded, trying to hold back the flood of tears that threatened to spill over. But despite the shaman's words, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, that this night was just the beginning of a darkness creeping into their lives. As Damon was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and carried back to the pack house, Serafina walked beside him, her heart heavy, her every step filled with worry. Rosalind had been right in one sense. She couldn't save Damon alone. But that nagging feeling, that insistent voice in her head, told her there was much more to this attack than anyone realized. The pack house loomed ahead, and Serafina's mind raced with uncertainty. Her mate's survival was all that mattered now, but she couldn't shake the sense that the calm before the storm was ending, and the storm that was coming would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The scent of herbs and incense was thick in the air as Serafina paced anxiously beside Damon's bed, her heart pounding in her chest. The small healing chamber, normally filled with calm and quiet, was alive with tension. Wolves from the pack had gathered at the door, unable to look away from the scene unfolding within. But Serafina couldn't tear her gaze away from Damon. He lay unconscious, his once commanding presence now reduced to stillness, pale skin flushed with fever. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one a reminder of just how close she had come to losing him. His dark hair, damp from sweat, clung to his forehead, and his clothes were removed to reveal the ugly gash across his shoulder. A wound so deep, so brutal, it seemed impossible that he was even still alive. But he was, and she wouldn't leave his side. Not for anything. Not even for a moment. Her hand trembled as she reached for his, carefully brushing his fingers with hers. His skin felt warm against her palm, and for a split second it comforted her, until she realized just how warm he truly was. The fever was high, his body struggling to heal itself, and she couldn't stop the terror creeping up her spine. "Damon, please," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Please, wake up, I need you." The shaman, an elderly wolf with years of experience, hovered over Damon, his hands glowing with the soft light of healing magic. His brow was furrowed in concentration as he chanted softly, trying to mend the injury with magic that had helped countless pack members in the past. But it wasn't enough. Damon's condition wasn't just physical. It was as if something deeper was holding him captive. Seraphina's heart clenched with every word of the shaman's chant, her mind racing with fear. She felt so helpless, watching him work so desperately and yet seeing no progress. She could feel the seconds dragging by like hours, each one heavier than the last. Her gaze flicked to Rosalind, who was standing near the door, her arms crossed in a stance that seemed more guarded than concerned. She'd been hovering around Damon's bed, her eyes soft, her voice quiet, as she offered her support. But Seraphina had always known Rosalind too well, and this was different. Rosalind caught Seraphina's gaze and offered a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eye. It was the same smile she always wore when pretending to care, pretending to be a friend. But there was something about the way she stood there, the way she kept glancing at Damon with that calculating look in her eyes, that made Seraphina's pulse spike in warning. Seraphina gritted her teeth but kept her focus on Damon. Is he going to make it?" she asked the shaman, her voice tight with a fear she couldn't hide. The shaman's gaze flickered to her, and for the briefest moment Seraphina could see the weight of his own worry in his eyes. "He's strong," he said softly, but there was an edge to his tone that made Seraphina's stomach drop. "But this injury is different. Something is hindering his healing. The magic... It's as if something is suppressing his strength." A sickening chill ran through Seraphina, and her eyes snapped to Rosalind once again. Rosalind wasn't even pretending to hide the satisfaction in her expression now. Her gaze lingered just a little too long on Damon's still form before quickly darting away. She looked at the shaman and gave a subtle nod, one so slight, so imperceptible to anyone else. But Seraphina... A warning bell rang in Seraphina's mind. Her stomach churned. What was Rosalind doing? Before Seraphina could voice her suspicions, Rosalind walked over, her movements deliberate and careful, as though she were trying to comfort Seraphina in her own way. "He'll wake up soon," Rosalind said, her voice soft but strangely detached. "The shaman's magic will help him. Just give him time." Seraphina couldn't respond. She wasn't sure if she wanted to speak at all. Her emotions were a tangled mess, and her trust in Rosalind had been steadily eroding since the moment she'd sensed something was off. It wasn't just the way Rosalind had acted earlier, during the rogue attack. It was everything. The way she always found her way near Damon. The way she watched him like she was waiting for something. Seraphina's hand gripped Damon's tighter. She would never let him go, not like this, not when they had a future to build. "You've been standing there long enough," Seraphina finally said, her voice low but pointed. "If you're so sure Damon will be fine, then maybe you should let him have the peace to recover." Rosalind's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, her expression unreadable. She paused, her fingers tapping against her crossed arms in a quiet rhythm, then looked back at Damon. "I'll go for now," Rosalind said, her tone calm but her eyes flashing with something unreadable. "But if you need anything, you know where to find me." Seraphina barely nodded, too focused on Damon to offer more than that. As Rosalind left the room, the door clicking shut behind her, Seraphina exhaled shakily, her eyes falling back to Damon. Her gaze softened as she looked at him again, her fingers brushing through his hair with tender care, pushing the damp strands away from his forehead. "Come back to me, Damon," Seraphina whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I need you more than anything. You have to come back. You're my everything." Damon's body trembled slightly in response, his chest rising and falling with slow, labored breaths. His skin was burning with fever, and Seraphina could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her. She would not lose him. She couldn't. A weak groan passed Damon's lips, and Seraphina's heart skipped a beat as his eyes fluttered open. He looked disoriented at first, his gaze hazy, but then his eyes found hers. The moment their gazes locked, something in Seraphina's chest finally loosened. The bond between them was there, alive and undeniable, and even though he was weak, even though he could barely hold on to consciousness, there was still that unshakable connection between them. "Seraphina," Damon rasped, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." Tears welled up in Seraphina's eyes, and she leaned down to press her forehead against his, her breath coming in shaky gasps. "I won't let you go, Damon. Never." In that moment, with Damon's hand weakly gripping hers, Seraphina could feel the bond strengthening, a steady pulse that resonated deep within her soul. He was still with her. He would fight, and she would fight for him. Together, they would face whatever darkness was trying to tear them apart. For now, the world could wait. She had Damon, and nothing would ever separate them again. Seraphina hadn't left his side for days, save for the brief moments when she was forced to tend to pack matters or seek out the healer's advice, but each time she returned to him, her gaze lingering on his face, willing him to wake. And now, finally, he was. The sound of his shallow breaths was the first thing Seraphina noticed as she sat beside Damon's bed, her fingers lightly resting on his hand. Her heart was already racing with hope, the flutter of her pulse quickening as she watched him stir. He moaned softly, his brow furrowing as his lashes fluttered. For a moment it felt like the world itself held its breath, and then, slowly, his eyes cracked open. Seraphina leaned forward, her heart leaping into her throat. "Damon? Damon, it's me," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling with emotion. His eyes, the stormy gray that she'd spent so many mornings waking up to, were confused, distant. A hollow ache pierced her chest at the way he looked at her, as though he knew he should recognize her but couldn't quite place her. His gaze moved over her face, searching, before meeting her eyes again, but there was no recognition there. Only uncertainty. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, raw with the remnants of unconsciousness, and it shattered Seraphina's heart. She felt like the ground had slipped from beneath her. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, and her mate shouldn't be looking at her like she was a stranger. She reached for him instinctively, her fingers trembling as they brushed his cheek. "I'm Seraphina," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she searched his eyes, begging for some sign that he remembered her, that he knew her, that he felt the bond between them. "You're Luna, your mate. We've been together for so long. Damon, please, it's me." His brow furrowed as he turned his head slightly, his gaze moving over her with the kind of scrutiny that made Seraphina's heart ache even more. The faintest hint of frustration began to seep into his expression. I don't know you." Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. No, this wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had spent days by his side, talking to him, praying for him to wake up. She'd held on to the hope that when he opened his eyes, he would see her and they would pick up where they had left off. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. "Damon, you do know me," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "I'm your mate. I'm Seraphina, your Luna. Don't you remember our bond, our connection?" His eyes darted to her lips, then back to her eyes, and he seemed to be struggling, trying to find something, anything that would trigger recognition. He was silent for a long moment, and Seraphina could see the tension building in his jaw, the confusion clouding his expression. "I can feel something," he said slowly, almost as if he was speaking to himself, "but it's gone. I don't remember you, but I know I should care. I know you should mean something to me." His hand twitched, and for a second Seraphina thought he might reach for her. Instead, he clenched his fist, frustration darkening his features. "Why can't I remember?" Seraphina's world tilted as she held his gaze. His words were a blade to her heart. The desperation in his voice, the utter confusion, cut deeper than anything she had felt before. This wasn't just amnesia. This was something more. A fracture in their bond. A break in the connection that had always been so undeniable. Her heart shattered, her breath ragged, and she quickly covered her face with her hands, willing herself to breathe. She could feel the sting of tears in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Not when she still had a chance to fix this. Damon, you do love me. You do. Please. The words spilled from her lips in a desperate, choking rush. We've laughed together, fought together, made a future together. Don't you remember? His eyes softened, but there was still no spark of recognition. He stared at her as if she were a riddle he couldn't solve, and it broke her all over again. The bond they had shared, the love that had flowed so freely between them, felt like a distant memory now, one he couldn't touch, couldn't reach. I can't remember, Damon said, his voice rougher now as the frustration mounted. It's all gone, all of it. I can't remember how long we've been together. I can't even remember how it felt to love you. The last words were like a blow, and Serafina staggered back, her hands falling to her lap. The aching void left in the wake of his admission was overwhelming. She had been prepared for him to be weak, for him to need time to heal, but this emptiness? She wasn't prepared for this. Her Damon was lost to her. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. She reached for him again, her fingers brushing his hand, her touch a desperate plea. He didn't pull away, but the tension in his face told her all she needed to know. He didn't know her. He didn't remember her. And the bond they had once shared, the one that had felt like an undeniable truth, was now fractured, split into pieces she couldn't repair. Not right now. She took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself, but the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her heartbreak. I'm still here, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm still your mate, Damon. I will wait for you. I will help you remember. Damon's eyes softened at the sound of her words, but it was no longer the deep, knowing affection she was used to. It was pity. His hand gently closed around hers, a weak grip that wasn't the possessive, protective hold he'd always given her before. I don't want to hurt you, he said softly. I just don't know you. And there it was, the bitter truth. Serafina wiped her tears away, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She would fight for him. She would fight for them. But for now, she had to accept this reality. That the Damon she loved, the Damon who was hers, was gone. The road ahead would be harder than anything she had ever faced. But she would wait. She would fight. Because he was her mate, and she knew deep down, he would find his way back to her, even if it took everything she had. The long wooden table in the Crescent Moon Pack's dining hall was filled with the usual chatter, laughter, the clink of cutlery, and the comforting murmur of familiar voices. But for Serafina, it was quieter than ever. She sat near the center of the table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her glass, staring across at Damon. Damon, who had been beside her in every part of their lives, was now an unfamiliar figure, distant, silent, as though a wall had been built between them. It wasn't just his lack of recognition, the loss of their bond that haunted her. It was his emotional absence, the way he seemed to have retreated inside himself, unable or unwilling to reach out to her. The pack had settled into their places, the alpha seat at the head of the table now feeling like a cold, lonely throne. Damon sat at the far end, his shoulders stiff, his hands wrapped around a goblet of water. The plate before him was untouched, and his gaze drifted aimlessly around the room, never meeting Serafina's. It was as if he was physically present, but mentally absent. He wasn't his usual self. He wasn't with her. Serafina's heart ached with every passing moment. She had thought that given time, the bond would heal, that he would remember her, that he would return to her. But the days had passed, and the quiet desperation in Damon's eyes remained, a painful reminder that she was still a stranger to him. The tension in the air was palpable. The pack, too, felt the shift, couldn't help but feel the rift between their alpha and his mate. Their glances kept drifting nervously to Serafina, as if they didn't know how to address the sudden divide that had been created. They had always looked to the bond between Damon and Serafina as something unshakable, But now the silence between them was deafening, and Serafina could feel the cold weight of their sympathy. Rosalind, of course, seemed to be in her element, sitting close to Damon, her body language open and welcoming as she leaned in slightly, speaking softly to him, her eyes lingering on his face with a kind of intensity that Serafina couldn't quite ignore. "How's the food, Alpha?" Rosalind asked, her voice light, her gaze never leaving Damon. "I'm sure you must be tired after everything." Serafina's grip on her glass tightened, her nails digging into the side as her pulse quickened. She could hear the soft, affectionate tone in Rosalind's voice, and it sent a stab of bitterness through her. Her instincts screamed at her to say something, to remind Rosalind of her place, but Serafina didn't. She couldn't. Not when Damon wasn't even aware of it. Damon glanced at Rosalind, and for the briefest moment, Serafina saw something like appreciation in his gaze. "It's fine," Damon replied quietly, his voice distant, as though he were speaking to a stranger. I'm not hungry." Rosalind smiled, her eyes softening with something close to sympathy. She shifted a little closer to him, her voice lowering as she continued to speak to him, offering reassurances Serafina felt were unnecessary. Her stomach twisted, but she refused to let it show. She had to remain calm. One of the betas, a younger male who had been part of their pack for years, attempted to break the silence, his voice warm and cheerful. "Come on, Damon. You're the one who always says that food brings good energy. The pack will be better off if you eat." He chuckled, trying to lighten the mood, but Damon didn't even respond, his attention on the untouched plate before him. His fingers traced the rim of his glass idly, but his mind seemed elsewhere. Serafina's heart clenched painfully. Her gaze wandered to Damon's features, tracing the familiar lines of his face. Except now, they seemed foreign, unreadable. She remembered the way his lips would curl into a smirk whenever she teased him. She remembered how his eyes would soften whenever he looked at her, full of love, devotion, and warmth. But now, nothing. It was as though the connection they had built over years of shared lives and experiences had been erased in an instant. He couldn't even recall what it felt like to love her. And that hurt more than anything. The young beta cleared his throat awkwardly, sensing the growing tension in the room. "Right, of course. I was just trying to..." But the words died on his lips when Damon raised his hand slightly, his tone flat and distant. "I'm not hungry." Serafina's chest tightened. She hated how cold he sounded, how detached. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once been her rock. This man, this stranger before her, was breaking her. Her emotions were a whirlwind. Fear, sadness, frustration. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't. Not here, not in front of the pack. She could feel their eyes on her, filled with sympathy and concern. The weight of their pity was unbearable. Damon shifted slightly, glancing up at the beta who had spoken before he looked toward Serafina for the first time since sitting down. His gaze swept over her face, but there was no warmth in it, no flicker of recognition. She held her breath, praying for the spark of affection she used to see in him, but all she saw was emptiness. I'll be going to rest," Damon said quietly, his voice still distant. He pushed back from the table, the motion jerky and uncoordinated, and stood, making his way toward the exit. Serafina stared after him, frozen in place. Her heart dropped to her stomach, a sickening feeling of helplessness washing over her. She wanted to call out to him, to stop him, but what could she say? How could she bring him back when he didn't even recognize her? Rosaline's eyes followed Damon as he left, but then, as if sensing Serafina's stare, she turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral. "They'll come around, Serafina," Rosalind said softly, almost too softly, as though it were something she had been rehearsing. "Just give him time. He's been through a lot." The words stung, but Serafina didn't respond. Instead, she let her gaze fall to the empty plate before her. She couldn't even bring herself to eat. The weight of the distance between her and Damon was suffocating, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the pack was beginning to draw away from her, too. Their concern was palpable, but it was almost like they saw her as broken, as if she was somehow responsible for the rift between them. Her grip tightened around the edge of the table, but she didn't say anything. What could she say? The truth was too raw, too painful. The evening continued around her, laughter, conversation, the clinking of dishes. But Serafina felt like an outsider in her own home. Her mate was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The cool evening air wrapped around Serafina as she led Damon through the quiet path just outside the pack house. It was a familiar route, one that Damon had often walked with her. The trees towered above them, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze, and the sky overhead was beginning to shift into hues of pink and purple. The setting sun painted the landscape in soft, romantic colors, but it didn't make Serafina's heart any less heavy. She had planned this walk for hours, hoping it would help him remember. This spot, this very tree, held too many memories of the day Damon had confessed his love for her. She'd been nervous back then, unsure of how he felt, but he had kissed her, pulling her into the warmth of his arms, his words steady and full of certainty. Now those memories felt like a distant dream, slipping through her fingers. Damon was walking beside her, his strides measured, his eyes distant, and Serafina could feel the ache of his detachment growing with every step. He looked at her with polite interest, but there was no recognition in his eyes, no warmth, nothing that reminded her of the Damon who had once been hers, completely. She stopped in front of the old oak tree, the one that had witnessed the beginning of their love, the place where they had shared their first kiss, their first confession. The bark was rough under her fingers as she lightly touched it, glancing back at Damon, a soft, hopeful smile on her face. "Damon," she began, her voice low but full of emotion, "this is the tree where you first told me you loved me." Damon glanced at it briefly, then back at her, his expression clouded with confusion. He seemed to feel something, a flicker, but it quickly passed. "I can sense that it's important," Damon said, his voice distant, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But I don't remember." Serafina's chest tightened, but she pushed past the pain. This was their moment, the moment she had been praying for, hoping for. She stepped closer, gently placing her hand on his arm. "We sat here," she continued softly, her eyes holding his. "You told me how much you loved me, how you'd never leave me. And I knew then, in my heart, that I was meant to be with you. Always." Damon stiffened, his jaw clenching. His hand went to his temple, and for a brief moment his eyes closed in what seemed like discomfort. I want to remember, I do, but it's like there's a wall blocking it," Damon said, the frustration clear in his voice. He winced, as though the effort to recall was causing him physical pain. "It hurts. It feels wrong." Serafina reached out instinctively, her hand brushing against his chest. "Damon, it's okay. We'll get through this. You'll remember. I know you will." But his eyes shot open again, his hand dropping to his side. The pain had passed, but the wall in his eyes remained. The connection between them was there, but it was faint, fragile. "I can't keep doing this, Sarah," Damon said, his voice strained. "Every time I try, it feels like my mind is tearing itself apart. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Serafina's heart splintered at his words. Her eyes burned with the tears she was holding back. She had been so hopeful, so certain that this would work, but now she saw the truth in his eyes. He was terrified that reaching for his memories would break him further, that the effort would cause more pain than he could bear. Before she could respond, a figure approached from the trees, a familiar presence. Rosalind. Serafina's gut tightened, but she pushed the emotion down. Rosalind had been there for Damon, had been his quiet support while he'd been recovering. But Serafina couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Rosalind's concern, something that went deeper than friendship. Rosalind stopped beside them, her expression soft, but there was a glint in her eyes that made Serafina wary. "I told you," Rosalind said gently to Damon, "pushing yourself too hard might hurt you more. You need rest, not these painful attempts to recall memories." Serafina's breath hitched, her stomach twisting. She watched as Rosalind's hand brushed against Damon's arm in a gesture that felt far too intimate, too familiar. Damon didn't pull away, his posture stiffening slightly, but not enough to indicate discomfort. "She's right, Damon," Rosalind continued, her voice laced with the same softness that had been present earlier when Serafina was in the room. "You don't have to force it. You can take your time. You don't need to remember right now." She turned her eyes to Serafina, and there was something in her gaze, something almost possessive. "Maybe it's best if you let him rest and stop pushing him." Serafina's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. Her eyes met Damon's, searching for any sign that he was still there, that the Damon she loved was still somewhere deep inside. But all she saw was uncertainty, fear, and the lingering pain that had been caused by whatever dark force had blocked his memories. Damon shifted uncomfortably under Rosalind's touch, his gaze moving between the two women, and then he finally looked back at Serafina, his expression apologetic, resigned. I think Rosaline is right. I don't want to hurt myself anymore." He paused, then added, "I don't want to hurt you either." A crushing silence settled between them. Serafina felt a lump in her throat, the ache in her chest intensifying. She wasn't enough. That was what his words felt like, though he hadn't meant them that way. He wasn't ready for her. He couldn't remember her love, their life together, and it hurt too much to force it. Rosalind was right, he needed space. But the cold void between them had grown, and Serafina felt it stretching, pulling her further and further away from the man she loved. "I'm sorry," Damon said again, his voice tight. "I need to go." And just like that, he turned away, walking slowly, as if the weight of the world was too much for him. Rosalind gave Serafina one last look, her eyes lingering just a bit too long before following Damon with a careful distance. Serafina stood there, alone beneath the tree that had once marked the beginning of her happiness. The night air seemed colder now, as if the very stars above her were witnessing the fracture of something she had once thought unbreakable. She pressed her hand to her chest, the ache nearly unbearable, but her resolve hardened in the quiet of the forest. She wasn't giving up. Something darker was at play, something that was trying to tear them apart, and she wasn't going to let that happen, not without a fight. She would fight for Damon, for them, even if it meant standing alone for now. The pack library was silent, save for the soft rustle of pages turning. Serafina sat hunched over an ancient text, the candlelight casting long shadows over the worn, leather-bound books that filled the shelves. The weight of her thoughts pressed down on her, making it harder to concentrate. Her mind was filled with endless questions. How had this happened to Damon? Why couldn't he remember her, their life together? And why did it feel like someone was keeping him from the truth? She skimmed through the pages, looking for anything that could explain the sudden fracture in their bond. But the more she read, the more frustrated she became. The texts were filled with healing spells, enchantments for mind-altering injuries, and various potions for everything from physical wounds to memory loss. Yet none of it offered the answers she desperately needed. There were hints of dark magic, but nothing definitive, nothing that could help her undo the damage. She closed the book with a frustrated sigh, her hands rubbing her temples. It felt as though she was fighting against an invisible force, something that was actively trying to tear them apart. Her gaze shifted to the window, the moonlight streaming in, and for a moment she closed her eyes, hoping that Damon would remember. But a noise broke her concentration. Footsteps. A figure appeared in the doorway, their silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway lanterns. It was Kai, a younger beta in training who had recently started assisting with pack matters. His broad shoulders and serious demeanor made him stand out from the other betas, and there was something about him that made Serafina feel a sense of calm, as if he understood the weight she carried. "Serafina," Kai said quietly, stepping inside, his eyes scanning the books scattered across the table. "You've been in here for hours. Is everything all right?" She looked up at him, a tired smile pulling at her lips. "I'm fine, just looking for answers." Kai nodded, his gaze softening. He wasn't just another pack member. He had always been observant, always seemed to notice when something was wrong, even when she tried to hide it. And right now he noticed her distress. "You don't seem fine," he said gently, walking closer. "Something's been off lately, I can tell. You've been distant from the pack. Damon, too." Seraphina's heart ached at the mention of Damon, but she couldn't stop herself from letting out a small, bitter laugh. "Damon is lost. I can't reach him anymore." She didn't tell him about the nights she'd spent waiting for him to remember, or the endless hours she had spent searching for a solution. But Kai seemed to understand. He sat down across from her, leaning forward, his voice dropping lower. "I've seen something strange," he confessed. "The shaman and Rosalind, they've been acting strange. I've seen them exchanging pouches of herbs, muttering things under their breath when they thought no one was looking." Seraphina's eyes widened. She hadn't imagined it. The unease she'd felt every time Rosalind and the shaman had been together, the secretive conversations, the way Rosalind had acted like she was trying to keep Damon away from her. Now it made sense. "What do you mean strange?" she asked, her voice tight. Kai hesitated for a moment, then looked at her seriously. "Greater than, I don't know. But there's something off about it. The herbs, I've never seen them before, and the way Rosalind's been looking at Damon, it's different. She's been making sure he stays at arm's length from you, hasn't she?" Seraphina nodded slowly, her heart sinking. She had known, deep down, something was wrong, and now here it was. Confirmation. "I can't prove anything," Kai continued, "but if you want to find out what's going on, you need to keep an eye on them. Trust your instincts, Seraphina. If something's happening to Damon, it's not just by chance." Seraphina's mind raced, her pulse quickening with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't imagining it. Rosalind was involved, and now she had the first real lead. "Thank you, Kai," Seraphina said, her voice low but full of determination. "I won't let this go." The weight of what Kai had said sat heavily in Seraphina's chest, but it wasn't enough to stop her. She needed more proof, more information, and as she rifled through the texts in the library, she found it. A dusty tome hidden behind others, its pages yellowed with age. It was a collection of dark magic rituals, but there was something about it that felt different from the rest. Her breath caught as she flipped through the brittle pages. There it was, a detailed description of potions and spells that could sever or suppress a mate bond. Her hands trembled as she read the words, the meaning of them sinking in. These weren't just healing spells, these were dark spells. Her thoughts whirled. She had to stop Rosalind. She had to prove it. As she absorbed the information, a sharp sound broke through her focus, a light tapping at the door. Before Seraphina could react, Rosalind stepped inside, her smile practiced and cool. "Still searching for answers, I see," Rosalind said, her voice light but with an undertone that made Seraphina bristle. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought you could use a little company." Seraphina stiffened, quickly hiding the book under the pile of others. "I'm just doing some research. What are you doing here, Rosalind?" Rosalind's gaze flicked briefly to the table, to the pile of books, and back to Seraphina. There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "Oh, just wanted to check on Damon, make sure he's all right. He's been under a lot of stress lately. I know you're both going through a difficult time." She gave a soft, almost pitying smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He'll remember soon. I'm sure of it." Seraphina held her ground, her expression neutral. "I'm sure he will, but I'm fine. Thank you for checking in." Rosalind seemed to study her for a long moment before nodding with a thin smile. "Of course," Rosalind said smoothly. "I'll let you get back to your research. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." As Rosalind turned to leave, Seraphina's mind raced. She knew now. Rosalind had to be behind this. She had to be. And now Seraphina had the proof. But she needed more. She needed to confront Rosalind, to expose the truth. That night, as Seraphina sat by Damon's side once more, he tossed and turned in his sleep, his brow drenched in sweat. The nightmares had returned. The same vague, haunting dreams where he could hear her voice calling to him, but he couldn't reach her. He saw her face, but it was blurry, distant, like she was fading away with every step. Damon awoke with a sharp gasp, his body trembling, and his eyes snapped open. Wide, frantic. His breathing was shallow, and for a moment it looked as though he couldn't remember where he was. Seraphina's heart clenched as she leaned over him. Damon, it's okay. It's just a dream. You're okay. Damon looked at her, confusion clouding his gaze as he ran a hand through his hair. Why does it feel like I'm losing you? He whispered, his voice hoarse with uncertainty. Why can't I remember? Seraphina's throat tightened. The pain in his voice, the longing, the confusion, it tore at her. He was still in there. He still felt it. It's okay, she said softly, her hand brushing against his. You'll remember. You have to. But his eyes darted to the door, and Seraphina's heart sank as Rosaline appeared, standing just outside the room, watching them. He needs rest, Rosaline said, her voice low but calm. He's been through a lot. Don't push him too hard, Seraphina. You might be hurting him more than helping him. Damon turned toward Rosaline, a weary look on his face. Seraphina's chest tightened as she saw the subtle shift in his attention. The way his focus seemed to lean toward Rosaline, as though she were the one offering comfort. Seraphina's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let Rosaline win. She would protect Damon and she would fight for their bond, but the path ahead was darker than ever. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Seraphina's quarters, casting long shadows across the room. She had awoken early, feeling off, but as the minutes ticked by, it became impossible to ignore. There was a dizzying sensation, a deep heaviness in her chest that she couldn't shake. She had never felt like this before, out of sorts, overheated, and nauseous. Even for a werewolf whose senses and strength often surpassed normal human limits, this was unusual. She tried to brush it off, blaming it on the lack of sleep, the constant worry over Damon, but something in her gut told her it wasn't just fatigue. She pushed the covers off her legs and swung her feet to the floor, but the moment she stood, the room tilted. The wave of dizziness surged through her, her heart pounding in her ears. After a long, slow breath, she tried to steady herself. This wasn't normal. No, this was something different. It felt too personal, too profound to ignore. Seraphina placed a hand against her stomach, her brow furrowing. The sensation in her chest, the heaviness, lingered, and with it came a sudden, inexplicable intuition. A pull, as though something was awakening inside her. Unable to shake the feeling, Seraphina made her way to the pack healer's quarters. The healer was an older wolf, wise and calm, someone who had treated countless injuries, illnesses, and magical afflictions in the pack. If anyone could offer answers, it would be her. Seraphina entered the small, cluttered room, the scent of herbs and soft candlelight filling the air. The healer was bent over a table, sorting through dried plants. But she paused when she saw Seraphina. The healer's sharp eyes studied Seraphina's face, the lines of concern immediately deepening. Seraphina, you look unwell. What's troubling you? The healer's voice was low yet full of quiet authority. Seraphina hesitated, then gave in, her voice trembling ever so slightly. I don't feel right. Dizzy, nauseous. It's unlike anything I've experienced before, and I've been feeling strange, almost heavy. The healer's eyes softened, a knowing flicker crossing her features. She beckoned Seraphina to sit, her hands already preparing a blend of herbs and potions that Seraphina knew were meant to calm the body, but the healer's words were measured when she spoke. Have you noticed any changes in your cycle? The healer asked gently, setting the herbs aside and watching Seraphina carefully. Seraphina's stomach churned at the question. She hadn't thought about it, but in the back of her mind, she already knew. The connection between her and Damon had been strained ever since the attack, and in the chaos of everything, she hadn't noticed the signs until now. I haven't thought about it, Seraphina admitted quietly. She paused, then added, but now that you mention it, I have felt different, like something inside me is changing. The healer's expression softened, and she placed her hand over Seraphina's. The warmth from her touch comforted Seraphina, yet the healer's eyes held a deep, knowing weight. "I believe I know what's happening," the healer said, her voice careful. "You're pregnant, Seraphina. You're carrying Damon's child." Seraphina's breath caught in her throat, and for a long moment everything around her seemed to still. Her heart hammered in her chest as her eyes searched the healer's face, looking for any sign of doubt, any hint that this was a mistake. But the healer's gaze never wavered. There was no doubt. The overwhelming flood of emotions that hit Seraphina left her breathless. A deep wave of joy, unexpected and pure, surged through her. But it was tempered with a terrifying uncertainty. Her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, the realization settling in. This wasn't just a new chapter in her life. This was a life with Damon, their child, a bond formed in the most intimate way. But with that joy came a terrible fear. Damon didn't remember her. He didn't remember their bond. And now, Seraphina wasn't just fighting for her love with him, she was fighting for the future of their child, too. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked up at the healer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want him to know. I want Damon to know we're having a baby. Maybe it will help him remember. Maybe it will bring him back to me." The healer placed a gentle hand on Seraphina's shoulder. Her eyes filled with empathy. "You must be cautious, Seraphina," she advised quietly. "Damon is under a great deal of emotional strain. His memories are blocked, and any sudden shock to his system, anything that overwhelms him, could cause him more harm. He might need time to adjust, to come to terms with this. You have to be patient with him." Seraphina nodded, swallowing against the lump in her throat. Patience. That was the one thing she was running low on. She wanted Damon to be the man he once was. Strong, confident, and loving. She needed him to be that man not just for her, but for the child they would raise together. "But he deserves to know," Seraphina whispered. "He deserves to know he's going to be a father." The healer gave her a soft smile, one that held the weight of experience and compassion. "I know, and he will, but be gentle with him. This will take time. Your bond is strong, Seraphina, and this child, your child, is a part of that bond. You will both find your way back to each other, but it will take time and trust. Don't rush it." Seraphina stood slowly, wiping away the single tear that had escaped. Her heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, hope, fear, love, and a deep, unshakable determination. "Thank you," Seraphina said softly, her voice thick with gratitude. "I'll be patient. I'll wait for him." The healer nodded, her expression knowing. "Trust in your love, Seraphina, and trust in the strength of your bond. It will guide you both." As Seraphina left the healer's chambers, the weight of her discovery still heavy in her chest, she walked through the quiet halls of the pack house. The thought of Damon, of their child, filled her heart with a renewed sense of purpose. She would do whatever it took to restore Damon's memories, to heal the rift between them, and to protect the life they had created together. She just needed him to remember. For them. For their baby. And somehow, she would make sure that he did. The evening was quiet in the pack's secluded corner where the elder wolves and betas in training often gathered. Seraphina had walked for a while, lost in her thoughts, until the crisp air had begun to cool her skin. As the last of the sunlight faded, she found herself at a small firelit gathering in the back courtyard, where she had always felt safe. A place where the weight of the world could be briefly lifted. Kai was sitting by the fire, his usual stoic expression softened by the warmth of the flames. He was a young beta in training, with broad shoulders and an easy confidence that made him a reliable presence in the pack. Despite his quiet nature, there was a kindness in his eyes, a readiness to listen that made Seraphina feel like she could talk without fear of judgment. She hesitated for only a moment before walking over to him, the cool breeze ruffling her hair. Kai looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a familiar warmth. "Seraphina," he greeted, standing and offering her a seat beside him. "I didn't expect to see you out here. Everything okay?" Serafina gave him a small, tired smile and sat down, the words pressing in her chest. She couldn't bear the isolation any longer. It felt like her world was crumbling, but Kai's steady presence gave her a sliver of hope. "I've found something out," she started, her voice softer than usual. "Something that changes everything." Kai raised an eyebrow, the concern in his eyes evident. He leaned in slightly, his posture showing that he was listening intently. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm. Serafina hesitated, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. Her gaze dropped to the ground for a moment as she gathered the strength to speak. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, the words hanging in the air like a fragile secret. "Damon's child. I've just found out." Kai's eyes widened in surprise, but there was no hesitation in his response. He leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful but filled with genuine support. "That's incredible, Serafina," he said softly. "But I can see why you're worried with everything that's going on with Damon." She nodded, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her. She had always dreamed of having a family with Damon, of growing old together and raising children. But now, with Damon lost to her, with Rosalind's manipulations threatening their bond, everything had become infinitely more complicated. "I can't let him stay like this," she whispered. "He's lost, and now I'm carrying his child. I need to bring him back. I need him to remember. But if Rosalind continues to keep him under her control, what happens to our child?" Kai's expression softened, his gaze steady and full of understanding. "The situation is delicate but not hopeless," he said gently. "I know you want to tell him. I can see how much it means to you, to both of you. But maybe it's not the right time yet. You don't want to overwhelm him more than he already is. If the bond between you is fractured, you need to find a way to rebuild it carefully. The bond that's between mates isn't something that can be forced, Serafina." She sighed, rubbing her temples in frustration. "I've tried everything, Kai. I don't want to keep this secret, but if he doesn't remember us, if he doesn't remember the love we shared, what's going to happen to our child?" Her voice wavered and she looked at him, her eyes filled with vulnerability. "What if this curse Rosalind has cast on him, it keeps us apart forever?" Kai's gaze was steady, unwavering. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "You've already done more than most would. You've been patient. You've been here for him. You're doing everything you can to help him remember. Don't let fear stop you now. If this child is part of your bond, it will help lead you both back to each other. But you need to be careful, Serafina. It's not just your future that's at stake, it's the future of your child, too. You'll need to find a way to break Rosalind's hold without putting your family in more danger." Her heart thundered in her chest as Kai's words sank in. There was hope in his voice, a quiet strength that filled her with a new sense of resolve. He was right. She couldn't give up. Not now. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "I needed to hear that." Kai smiled, his hand squeezing her shoulder reassuringly. "Don't mention it. We're all here for you, Serafina. We'll make sure you both get through this." The next few days felt like a blur. Serafina spent most of her time contemplating how she could break through Damon's walls, how she could bring him back to her, back to their family. Every time she saw him, her heart ached, but she couldn't give up. She would fight for them, for their child. One evening, while the pack gathered for dinner, Serafina sat quietly at the table, pretending to eat, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Her fingers absently traced the edge of her plate, her mind racing with ideas, strategies. Damon had been more distant lately, his confusion deepening with each passing day, but she knew that something had to change. Across the room, Damon sat with Rosalind. His eyes seemed vacant, distant. He wasn't engaging with anyone, but Rosalind kept glancing at him with concern, a hand lightly brushing his arm whenever he shifted in his seat. Serafina couldn't tear her gaze away. There was something about the way Rosalind hovered over him, as though she was trying to keep him from returning to his old self. Serafina's fists clenched in frustration. Rosalind had to be stopped, but how? And what if Damon was too far gone? She couldn't bear the thought of raising their child alone without him. Rosalind noticed Serafina's gaze and gave her a cold smile. Her eyes sparkled with something unsettling, and for a moment, Serafina could swear there was something almost triumphant in Rosalind's expression. "You should eat more," Rosaline called across the room to Serafina, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "You look a little pale." Serafina forced herself to smile back, her lips curling into something thin and sharp. "I'm fine, Rosaline. Thank you for your concern." But Rosaline didn't look away. Her eyes locked onto Serafina's with an unspoken challenge, as though she knew exactly what Serafina was thinking, exactly what she was planning. Serafina's resolve solidified in that moment. No more running, no more hiding. She was going to take back her future. For her child. For Damon. Damon was still in there, and no matter how dark things became, she wasn't going to let him stay lost forever. As the evening went on, Serafina felt the weight of the tension in the room, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. The pack members around her whispered in hushed tones, but Serafina no longer felt alone. She had a new strength inside her, a new purpose. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. The tides were turning, and soon everything would change. The night was still and heavy with an unsettling silence. The only sound was the steady ticking of a clock on the wall, marking the passage of time that seemed to move far too slowly for Serafina's anxious heart. She sat by Damon's side, watching him sleep fitfully, her heart aching as she observed his troubled expression. The nightmares had returned. Damon's brow furrowed, his lips parted as if he were gasping for air. His body jerked beneath the covers, and then, with a strangled gasp, he shot upright, his chest rising and falling rapidly with panic. Sweat clung to his skin, making his usually dark hair damp and wild. He looked around, eyes wide with fear, his breathing erratic. Serafina immediately reached for him, her hand gently landing on his arm, but before she could speak, Damon shook his head, his hands clutching his temples, as if trying to make sense of the confusion in his mind. It's happening again," Damon muttered through gritted teeth, his voice thick with fear. Serafina's heart skipped a beat. She had seen him wake like this before, disturbed by dreams that seemed to haunt him even in his waking hours. The faceless woman that appeared in his nightmares had been a constant, calling his name, begging for his help. Yet when Damon awoke, he had no memory of her, no explanation for the terror in her cries. "Damon, you're safe now," Serafina said softly, her fingers brushing his damp hair away from his face. "It's just a nightmare. You're here, with me." He looked up at her, but his gaze was distant, as though something inside him was still fighting to break free, to remember. His eyes briefly flickered to hers before he looked away, an expression of frustration crossing his features. "I don't know what's real anymore," Damon admitted, his voice low, full of tension. "I keep dreaming about her, that woman, crying for me, and there's this pull. I feel like I'm supposed to do something, like I'm supposed to care, but I don't remember her. I don't know why she's so familiar, but it's like a weight I can't shake." Serafina's heart clenched with empathy. She had tried everything to break through to him, to remind him of their bond, but every time he looked at her, it felt like he was looking at a stranger. The distance between them had grown unbearable, and each of his fragmented memories only seemed to pull him further away. "It's okay, Damon. You're not alone," Serafina whispered, her fingers gently brushing his arm, her touch soothing. "You'll remember. I know you will. I'm right here by your side." But before Damon could respond, the door creaked open and Rosalind entered the room, her expression one of concern. She had been visiting Damon frequently, offering her quiet support during his recovery, but something about her presence always made Serafina uneasy. "Damon, you're shaking," Rosalind said softly, her voice almost a caress as she moved to his side. "These nightmares are taking their toll on you. I think it's time you take a break, let your mind rest." Serafina tensed, watching as Rosalind's hand gently placed itself on Damon's shoulder, her fingers tracing small, soothing circles. Damon closed his eyes, a sigh escaping his lips as if Rosalind's touch offered him the comfort he craved. It stung. Seeing him find peace in someone else's presence when she had been the one to fight for him, to hold on. Damon turned toward Rosalind, his eyes clouded with confusion. "I just don't know what to think anymore," Damon said, his voice strained. "Everything feels so jumbled, like I'm being pulled in two directions." Rosalind's smile was soft, almost sympathetic, but Serafina saw the flicker of something deeper in her eyes. It wasn't just concern. It was something else, something calculated. "It's okay, Damon," Rosalind said, her voice as gentle as a whisper. "You don't need to figure it all out right now. I'm here for you. We're all here for you." Serafina's chest tightened. She stood up slowly, her eyes darting between Damon and Rosalind. The invisible barrier between her and Damon seemed to grow wider, and she couldn't help but feel like she was losing him to Rosalind's subtle influence. "I'll give you some space," Serafina said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'll be in the other room if you need me." Damon didn't respond, his gaze still fixed on Rosalind, and Serafina's heart shattered as she stepped away. She left the room, her mind spinning with doubts and fears. Was Rosalind the reason Damon couldn't remember? Was she somehow blocking him from the truth? The next morning, Serafina entered the pack's main hall, her face a mask of calm, despite the turmoil inside. Damon had barely spoken to her since the night before, and every time she tried to approach him, he seemed more distant, more withdrawn. His quiet moments with Rosalind were becoming increasingly frequent, and Serafina felt the weight of her growing suspicion pressing down on her. The pack was gathered in the main hall for an early briefing. Tension hung thick in the air, and Serafina could sense the undercurrent of unease rippling through the pack. The rogues at the borders were becoming more frequent, more aggressive, and the pack's leadership was faltering under the uncertainty of Damon's condition. Damon stood at the front of the room, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning the reports in front of him with a focus that seemed more mechanical than driven. His mind wasn't fully here, and Serafina could see it. The gap between them, the growing divide. "We've had more rogue sightings along the eastern border," the beta-in-training reported, his tone serious. "They're moving closer to pack territory, and we need to increase patrols." Damon nodded absently, his fingers tapping against the surface of the table, but it was Rosalind who spoke next, her voice cutting through the tension. "Perhaps I should lead the patrols personally," Rosalind suggested smoothly. "I've been in the field before, and I know how to handle situations like this." The words sent a cold shiver down Serafina's spine. She could see the subtle way Rosalind positioned herself, always near Damon, always offering herself as the solution. Damon glanced at her, and without hesitation, he nodded. "I think that's a good idea," Damon said, his voice quiet, lacking the usual conviction. "Rosalind, you lead the patrols. Make sure the borders are secured." Serafina's stomach churned. She had been hoping for Damon to take charge, to show that he still had the strength to lead them, but his continued reliance on Rosalind made her heart twist with a sense of helplessness. Was this how it would always be now? As the meeting progressed, Serafina noticed the way the pack members looked at her. Their expressions soft with sympathy. They were concerned, but there was nothing they could do to bridge the gap. Damon was their alpha, but he was not the same man he used to be. The pack's unity was fraying, and Serafina realized, with a heavy heart, that it wasn't just Damon's memory that was at risk. The entire pack's safety was hanging by a thread, and with Rosalind continuing to subtly influence him, she wasn't sure how much longer they could hold everything together. Later that night, Serafina couldn't sleep. She paced restlessly in her quarters, her mind racing with the knowledge that Damon's struggles were growing more intense, more desperate. The nightmares, the confusion, the increasing presence of Rosalind. It all pointed to one thing. Something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Damon lay in his bed, restless and tormented. The dreams returned in waves, vivid, cruel dreams of Serafina, her face twisted in sorrow, calling out to him, begging for him to remember. He tossed and turned, his body drenched in sweat, and with each passing minute he felt further away from the truth. "Why can't I remember?" Damon whispered to himself, his voice hoarse as he sat up in bed, clutching his head in agony. Why can't I remember her? Outside his door, Rosalind heard him stir. She walked toward his room, her steps slow and deliberate, a smile curving at the corners of her lips. The seeds of doubt she had planted in Damon's mind were taking root. "Damon," Rosalind called softly from the doorway. "You need rest. Let me help you. I'm here for you." Damon didn't look at her, his mind clouded, still trapped in the haze of his confusion. "I'm not sure who to trust anymore," Damon confessed, his voice barely audible. "Everything feels so wrong." Rosalind's expression softened with feigned sympathy. She stepped closer to him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "I'm here, Damon," she said, her voice soothing. "You don't have to go through this alone. Trust me." And as Damon closed his eyes, seeking comfort in Rosalind's touch, Seraphina stood in the hallway, her heart breaking with the realization that time was running out. The shaman's hut was quiet, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and incense. The room was dimly lit, with shadows stretching across the stone walls as the late afternoon sun filtered through the small window, casting golden beams across the cluttered shelves. Seraphina stood at the threshold, her eyes narrowing with determination. She had waited too long, tolerated too many unanswered questions. Now she was here for the truth. Beside her stood Kai, her trusted ally. He had been the one to first notice the odd behaviors of the pack's healer and the strange exchanges between the shaman and Rosalind. His quiet but steady presence had made him an invaluable confidant, and now they were about to confront the one person who held the answers to the mystery of Damon's memory loss. "Are you sure about this?" Kai asked, his voice low but steady as he scanned the room. His hand hovered near his side, where he kept his weapon, ever vigilant. "This might get ugly." Seraphina nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sure. I can feel it, Kai. Rosalind has been behind this all along, and if the shaman's involved, then this ends now." The shaman's quarters were quiet, except for the soft rustling of papers on the wooden desk. Seraphina took a deep breath and stepped inside, her resolve hardening. She wasn't leaving without answers. The shaman, an older wolf with long silver hair and deeply lined features, looked up from his work with an unreadable expression. His eyes briefly flicked to Seraphina, before quickly shifting to Kai. "What brings you here, Seraphina?" The shaman's voice was calm, but there was something in his gaze, something that set Seraphina's instincts on edge. He knew something. She could feel it. Seraphina didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, she pulled out the book she had secretly researched, along with the herbal mixture and enchanted objects she had found in the shaman's personal belongings. She slammed the book on the desk with a loud thud, watching as the shaman's face paled ever so slightly. "You know what this is?" Seraphina said, her voice sharp with accusation. "Memory manipulation potions. Herbal concoctions meant to block memories or cause confusion. I found this among your things, and I want to know why. Why was Damon's memory erased? Why was he forced to forget me?" The shaman stiffened, his lips pressing together in a thin line. He avoided her gaze, and Seraphina could practically see the tension building in his body. Kai stepped forward slightly, his presence a silent threat. "Answer her, shaman. We don't have time for games." The shaman looked between them, and for a moment there was only silence. The weight of the truth pressed down on the room, heavy and suffocating. Then, with a deep sigh, the shaman finally spoke, his voice trembling with reluctant defeat. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," the shaman admitted, his hands shaking as he reached for the potions. "Rosalind, she blackmailed me. She promised me protection in exchange for my cooperation. She forced me to perform the ritual on Damon, to erase his memory of Seraphina and anything that might bring him back to her. She said it was for the good of the pack, that Damon wasn't ready for the truth." Seraphina's breath caught in her throat as the shaman's confession sank in. Her mind raced with fury and disbelief. She had known it. She had felt it. Rosalind had been the architect of Damon's suffering, the one to manipulate him, to twist his mind in ways that had shattered everything they had built together. "How could you?" Seraphina whispered, her voice a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "You let her do this to him, to me." The shaman's gaze dropped to the table, and his voice was thick with regret. I didn't have a choice, he said quietly. Rosalind made it clear that I would face consequences if I didn't comply. She had leverage. She had power over me. Serafina felt her heart race, the fury rising within her like a tidal wave. Her mind was spinning with everything she had just heard, and the weight of it all was too much to bear. Damon had been a victim in all of this, a pawn in Rosalind's game. This ends now, Serafina said, her voice a low growl. I'm going to make sure Damon knows the truth. He deserves it. Serafina's steps were purposeful as she approached Damon's office later that evening. She had the evidence now, proof that Rosalind had orchestrated everything. The truth was finally within her grasp, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. But as she reached the door to Damon's office, she hesitated. Would he believe her? Would he trust her, even after everything that had happened? The doubts gnawed at her, but she pushed them aside. Damon needed to know. The truth had to come out. She opened the door, stepping into the dimly lit room. Damon was standing by the window, looking out over the packed territory. His back was to her, but the moment he heard the door open, he turned. His eyes were tired, haunted, and there was still that distance between them. "Serafina?" Damon said softly, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "What is it?" Serafina stepped forward, holding out the book and the vial of herbs that had once been hidden away. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she looked into Damon's eyes, searching for some sign that he still cared, that he still remembered. "I have proof," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "Proof that Rosalind is the one who caused your memory loss. She's the one who's been manipulating you, Damon, not me. I would never hurt you." Damon's gaze shifted to the items in her hands, and for a moment his expression softened, but then it quickly hardened. He looked at her with something akin to skepticism. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Serafina, but I don't think this is helping," Damon said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not ready for these accusations. Maybe you're just—" But before he could finish, the door swung open abruptly and Rosalind walked in, her presence smooth and confident. She quickly moved between Damon and Serafina, her gaze settling on the evidence in Serafina's hands. "What is this nonsense?" Rosalind asked, her voice laced with concern, though Serafina could hear the underlying edge. "Serafina, you've been under a lot of stress lately. You've been pushing yourself. I think it's best if we just give Damon some space." Serafina's pulse quickened as Rosalind moved to stand protectively beside Damon, her hand lightly resting on his arm. Damon, caught between the two women, looked uncertain. His eyes darted between them, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Serafina," Damon said, his voice wavering, "I don't know who to trust anymore. I just don't understand what's happening." The weight of his words hit Serafina like a punch to the gut. She took a step forward, her heart breaking as she tried to reach him. "Damon, please," she started, but Rosalind's sharp voice cut her off. "Enough," Rosalind said, her tone sharp, but her smile was soft and calculating. "Damon's been through enough, Serafina. Maybe you should leave him to process this in peace." The door slammed shut behind her as Serafina stood there, helpless. Her heart cracked, but the fire of determination burned brighter. She wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever. Rosalind had won the battle for Damon's trust, but Serafina would win the war. She would prove the truth, no matter the cost. Damon sat in his chamber, the dimming light of dusk casting long shadows across the stone walls. The day had been long, filled with more confusion than clarity, and now, as he sat alone with his thoughts, the silence was almost unbearable. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the surface of the small enchanted object Serafina had left behind. A pendant, something he barely remembered but knew had once meant everything. The pendant's cool surface felt oddly familiar against his skin, and he couldn't help but wonder why it felt like he should know it. Why his hand ached to hold it, to understand its significance. He turned it over in his hands, the glint of the metal catching the light in strange ways, like it was trying to tell him something just beyond his reach. Suddenly the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, more charged, and his heart skipped a beat. In a flash, a memory surged forward, a moment so vivid, so real, it felt like he was living it again. It was a memory of a quiet night, soft laughter, the warm glow of candlelight, the delicate scent of roses and fresh air. And there she was, Serafina. He could see her clearly now. Her smile, the way her hair caught the light, the sparkle in her eyes. He remembered the way her laughter had wrapped around him, her gentle teasing, the comfort of her presence. "You can't possibly be afraid of the dark," Serafina had teased, her voice playful as she leaned in closer to him on the porch, the cool night air brushing against their skin. "You're a werewolf, for crying out loud." Damon's chest tightened as the memory flooded back, but then, just as quickly, it was gone. The image of her smile, her laughter. Everything faded like mist, leaving only a hollow emptiness where once there had been warmth. "What was that?" Damon whispered to himself, his hand gripping the pendant tighter, as if willing the memory to return. It was only a glimpse, fragmented, incomplete, but enough to make his pulse race with a mixture of confusion and longing. His mind was still clouded, but for the first time in days, something in him felt like it was coming back. His gaze shifted toward the door as Rosalind's footsteps approached, steady and controlled. She entered the room with her usual calm demeanor, but there was something in her eyes, a subtle wariness as she noticed the pendant in his hand. "Is something wrong?" Rosalind asked, her tone soft but with an edge of concern. Damon quickly shoved the pendant into his pocket, trying to shake off the lingering emotions that the flashback had stirred. I'm fine," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Just thinking." Rosalind's eyes narrowed just slightly, as if sensing something amiss, but she didn't press him. Instead, she crossed the room to sit beside him, her fingers gently brushing against his arm in what was meant to be a soothing gesture. "You've been through so much," Rosalind said, her voice low, comforting. "But you don't need to worry about anything right now. You have me. I'll make sure you're okay." Damon stiffened at her touch, the overwhelming sensation of someone else being there, someone who wasn't her, gnawing at the back of his mind. He had been relying on Rosalind for so long, but there was something he couldn't ignore, a growing sense of wrongness, a feeling that told him she wasn't telling him everything. He didn't pull away from her, but his mind was no longer fully hers. That fragment of memory, the one that had just surfaced, was enough to make him question everything. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him wonder if he had been manipulated, if Rosalind had been hiding something from him. "I don't know what's real anymore," Damon muttered, his fingers clenched tightly around the fabric of his shirt. Rosalind, ever the patient comforter, leaned in closer, her voice soothing as she spoke. "I know you don't. But that's okay. We'll get through this together. You don't have to face any of it alone, Damon." The main hall of the pack house was filled with the murmurs of the council as the pack members gathered for an emergency meeting. Serafina stood at the front, her posture firm, though the storm inside her raged on. She had the proof, the confession from the shaman, and now it was time to confront the pack council. The truth had to come out, and Damon had to know the real reason behind his memory loss. As she entered the hall, the tension in the air was palpable. Many eyes turned toward her, some full of sympathy, others guarded. Damon was sitting at the head of the table, his usual confidence barely a shadow of what it once was. He looked at Serafina as she approached, but there was no warmth in his eyes, no recognition. Serafina set the shaman's confession down in front of him. The room grew silent as the pack members leaned forward, waiting for what would come next. "Damon," Serafina began, her voice steady but filled with raw emotion, "you deserve to know the truth. Rosalind has been manipulating you, using the shaman to block your memories and keep you from remembering me, from remembering us." A murmur ran through the room as the council exchanged wary glances. Damon looked down at the paper, confusion and disbelief washing over his face. "What is this, Serafina?" Damon's voice was quiet, disbelieving. "You've been telling me I've been manipulated this whole time, but..." Before he could finish, Rosalind stood, her presence commanding attention as she quickly moved to Damon's side. Her eyes narrowed as she turned toward Serafina, the sweetness of her smile replaced with something colder, more calculating. "What is this?" Rosalind interrupted, her voice dripping with false concern. "Serafina, you've been under so much stress. You've tried to manipulate Damon's feelings before, and now you're doing it again. You're the one trying to cause confusion in his mind." Serafina's breath hitched as Rosalind's words landed with devastating precision. She could see the way Damon looked at Rosalind, the way he clung to her comfort, his mind unable to fully grasp the truth. "This is nothing but a lie," Rosalind continued, her gaze never leaving Serafina. "Damon's been through enough, and now you're feeding him more lies to manipulate him." Damon's eyes flicked between Serafina and Rosalind, his expression torn. The room was heavy with the weight of his indecision, and Serafina felt her heart break as she saw him falter. I don't know what to believe," Damon confessed, his voice strained, his hands gripping the edges of the table. "You both say such different things. How am I supposed to know what's true?" The tension in the room was thick, and Serafina could feel the walls closing in on her. She had come here to expose the truth, but now it seemed as though she was losing him all over again. Damon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor as he turned toward the door. "I need time to think," he said, his voice tight with uncertainty. I can't make any decisions right now." Serafina stood frozen, watching him leave, her heart heavy with defeat. Rosalind's smile had returned, victorious and calm, but Serafina's resolve only strengthened. Damon might be torn for now, but she wouldn't stop fighting for him. The truth would come out one way or another. The council called for a recess, but Serafina's mind was already racing. The stakes had never been higher. Damon's future and their child's depended on her ability to break through the lies. This was only the beginning. The crisp morning air hung heavy with a sense of change. Serafina stood by Damon's side as they surveyed the pack's territory, the sun just beginning to rise, casting golden hues over the vast expanse of the forest. They were both on edge, still reeling from the tension of the council meeting the day before, the uncertainty of Damon's fractured memory clouding everything between them. Despite her resolve to keep fighting, Serafina couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big. As if on cue, a messenger appeared at the edge of the clearing, breathless and wide-eyed, his voice urgent as he approached. "Alpha, Luna," the messenger said, bowing quickly before them. "There's someone at the border, a female wolf requesting entry. She claims to know you, Serafina." Serafina's heart stilled in her chest, her breath catching as she looked at Damon, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Do you know who it is?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. The messenger shook his head. "She didn't give her name, just said she was looking for you." Before Damon could respond, Serafina felt a strange pull in the air, a sharp, magnetic force that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. It was like an invisible thread tightening between her and the approaching figure. She knew that presence. She didn't need to hear the name to know who it was. As the woman stepped into the clearing, Serafina's breath hitched in her throat. It was Celestine, her twin sister. After years of absence, Celestine Stormbound appeared before them, her tall figure cutting through the morning mist with an air of quiet confidence. Her long dark hair framed her striking face, the same sharp features Serafina knew all too well. But there was something different about her, something off. Serafina's heart raced as she locked eyes with her twin. The bond that had always tied them together, a thread of invisible connection, suddenly flared to life, but it wasn't just her feeling it. Damon's breath caught in his chest as he turned toward Celestine. His expression morphed from confusion to something more primal, something unsettling. His gaze was fixed on her, his pupils dilating, his jaw tightening. It wasn't just recognition. There was something deeper, something that made his entire body tense. Serafina's heart sank, her stomach twisting with a familiar, gut-wrenching fear. She knew what this was. She could feel it too, the pull. Damon's voice was barely a whisper, but it felt like a thunderclap in the silence of the clearing. She's my mate? Damon's words were not a question but a statement, and Seraphina felt the weight of them settle like lead in her chest. Celestine's eyes softened, and for a moment, Seraphina saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. Her twin sister's gaze flickered between Damon and Seraphina could feel the emotional storm brewing behind those hazel eyes. "I didn't want to come back like this," Celestine said quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "But I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. I had to see him." Seraphina took a shaky breath, her world tilting in that moment. Her twin, her sister, the other half of the bond she'd always shared with Damon, and now Celestine was his mate too. Damon's hands clenched at his sides, his face drawn with confusion and growing panic. He glanced at Seraphina, his expression torn, as if searching for something, anything, to explain this chaos. How could this happen?" Damon muttered, his voice raw with uncertainty. "How could I have two mates?" Seraphina's heart ached for him. For herself. For everything they'd fought for. The bond between them had always been strong, undeniable, but this was something she hadn't prepared for. A twist in their fate that threatened to unravel everything. Later that afternoon, after the initial shock of Celestine's arrival had settled, Seraphina found herself walking alongside her twin sister in a secluded spot just beyond the pack house, deep within the edge of the forest. The air was still, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Damon had stayed behind, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, the weight of the revelation still pressing down on him. Seraphina's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Celestine, the pain in her chest palpable. This was the woman who had been gone for years, who had left without so much as a word. And now, Seraphina was forced to face the truth. Celestine wasn't just her estranged sister. She was Damon's second mate. "Why didn't you tell me?" Seraphina's voice trembled with emotion, the hurt raw as she faced Celestine. "Why did you leave? And now, you come back like this? You can't just walk in here and claim him. You've been gone for so long, and now you expect me to just accept it?" Celestine's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her gaze filled with regret. She reached out as if to comfort Seraphina, but Seraphina pulled back, her chest tightening. "I never wanted to come between you," Celestine said softly. "I felt the bond between you and Damon, felt it as strongly as I felt my own bond to him. I knew what it would do to you, and I couldn't bear it. I left because I thought it was the right thing to do. I never wanted to hurt you, Seraphina." Seraphina's eyes burned with unshed tears, her anger bubbling up, but beneath it there was a deep ache that only Celestine could understand. This was her sister, and yet in that moment, it felt like a stranger was standing before her. Someone who had kept a part of herself hidden, someone who had chosen to walk away when Seraphina needed her the most. "You could have told me," Seraphina said harshly, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and frustration. "You could have come back. We could have figured this out together." Celestine looked down, her face pained, and for the first time Seraphina saw the vulnerability in her twin sister's eyes. The same vulnerability Seraphina had always guarded so closely. "I could have," Celestine admitted softly, "but I didn't want to make it worse. I knew how powerful your bond with Damon was. I didn't want to come between you two. But when I saw him again, when I felt that pull, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer." Damon's voice broke through the quiet just as Seraphina opened her mouth to respond. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and longing. "I overheard," Damon said quietly, his voice strained. "I didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't ignore it." He stepped forward, his gaze heavy with emotion. "I don't understand what's happening. I can't even remember half of what's been said, but I feel this. I feel it with both of you." The tension in the air was thick, and Seraphina's heart pounded in her chest. Damon's words hung in the air, a shattering truth they had all been avoiding. "Damon," Seraphina whispered, her voice filled with heartbreak. "I don't know what to do. I've always loved you. But this changes everything. Damon took a step toward them both, his body trembling with the weight of his own confusion and longing. I don't want to hurt either of you, Damon said, his voice raw. But I don't know how to fix this. How do I choose between two mates? In that moment, Serafina realized that the illusion of their perfect future had shattered. The pull of fate had created an unbreakable triangle, one that none of them had the power to escape. Damon was torn between them, and with the weight of his decision pressing down on him, the pack's leadership, their futures, everything, now hung in the balance. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the large windows of the pack house, casting soft beams of warmth across the stone floors. The room was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood as Serafina paced the floor. She had to get her thoughts in order. She had to face this head-on. Damon's revelation that he was bound to both her and Celestine had ripped through her like a storm. Her heart ached with the depth of the bond she still shared with him, and yet something had changed. Her world was no longer just about her and Damon. Her sister, Celestine, was in the picture now, and it felt like a wound that refused to heal. Yet, as much as Serafina wanted to hold on to the anger, she couldn't deny the sincerity in Celestine's eyes when they'd talked. Her twin sister hadn't come back to claim Damon for herself. She'd come back because she, too, was pulled by a bond she couldn't ignore. The pull had brought them both to Damon, but it wasn't about competition. It was about fate. Serafina stopped pacing and turned to face Celestine, who sat at the table with her head bowed, her long hair falling forward as she fidgeted with a piece of cloth. The silence between them felt suffocating, but Serafina knew it was necessary. They had to talk. They had to understand each other. Celestine looked up, her eyes red from the long days of tension, regret, and longing that had passed since her return. I never wanted this to happen, Serafina, Celestine said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to come between you and Damon. I thought if I stayed away, maybe it would be easier for you both, but fate, she paused, a sigh escaping her lips. Fate had other plans. Serafina's heart ached as she looked at her sister. This was Celestine, the girl she had shared so many childhood memories with, the girl who had been her partner in mischief, her confidant, her constant in the world. And now, here they were, caught in a mess neither of them had chosen. You left me, Celestine, Serafina replied, her voice thick with emotion. You left me to handle everything with Damon on my own. We were supposed to face things together. Celestine's expression crumpled with guilt. She bit her lip, struggling to find the right words before speaking in a broken tone. I thought it would be better for you. For both of you. I thought that if I stayed away, if I never acted on the pull I felt toward Damon, it would spare you the pain. But I didn't know what it would do to him. I didn't know it would tear everything apart. The weight of Celestine's words hung in the air, and for the first time, Serafina felt the crushing weight of her sister's guilt. She had kept a part of herself locked away, avoiding the inevitable. She had been protecting herself, just as much as she had been trying to protect me. Serafina sat down at the table opposite Celestine, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. She wiped away a stray tear that had fallen without her notice. We were always close, Celestine. We shared everything. But when you left, it felt like I lost a part of myself, and now, this. Damon. Serafina shook her head, trying to push through the growing lump in her throat. I can't just let him go. He's still mine. He's ours. Celestine reached across the table, her hand hovering just above Serafina's, her eyes soft with sincerity. I'm not here to take him from you, Serafina, I swear it. I'm not here to break your bond. Celestine's voice cracked as she spoke, and Serafina felt the echo of the same raw vulnerability in her sister that had always been a part of her. I'm here to help you. We need to fix this. For him. The words hung in the air like a prayer, and Serafina's chest tightened as the weight of the situation settled in. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about Damon and the love they'd shared. It was about all of them. Damon needed both of them. Serafina let out a shaky breath, her eyes meeting Celestine's. I can't believe we're here. Serafina whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. But we have to do this. For Damon, for the pack, we have to fix everything. Celestine nodded, her gaze unwavering. We will, she said, her voice strong despite the cracks in her heart. Together. The two sisters sat in silence, the bond between them fragile yet undeniably present. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but the foundation was there, and maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering light of a single lantern on the table. Serafina, Celestine, Kai, and the reformed shaman sat gathered around the table, their faces etched with resolve. The weight of what they were about to do was palpable, but Serafina could feel the unity in the room. This wasn't just a matter of exposing Rosalind's deceit. It was about saving Damon, saving the pack, and fighting back against the manipulation that had held them all captive for too long. Rosalind's web of lies is too deeply woven for us to just walk in and confront her head on, Kai said, his voice low but steady. We'll need proof, something undeniable. Celestine, who had been unusually quiet, nodded in agreement. We'll need to break her hold over Damon, she said, her voice clear with a determination that mirrored Serafina's own. I know how strong the bond is between us. Maybe that will be the key. If I can break through to him, even for a moment, maybe he'll start to remember. I can't promise anything, but I'll do everything I can. The reformed shaman, who had seen the toll Rosalind's magic had taken on Damon, added his voice to the conversation. We have to be careful, he cautioned, his face grim. Rosalind's influence is stronger than you realize, but I've seen her methods. I can help you expose the truth. Serafina took a deep breath, her fingers clutching the edge of the table as she gathered her strength. They had a plan. They had the pieces they needed to expose Rosalind's treachery. And this time, Serafina wouldn't back down. We do this together, Serafina said, her voice firm. We expose Rosalind. We make Damon see the truth, for the pack, for our future. And we'll do it no matter what it takes. Celestine squeezed Serafina's hand, her eyes filled with determination. Together. Serafina nodded, feeling a sense of unity she hadn't felt in weeks. With her sister by her side, and with the strength of the pack behind them, they were ready. It was time for the final confrontation. The weight of everything that had come before this, the manipulation, the heartbreak, the lies, pressed on her shoulders. But now, for the first time, Serafina could see a way forward. She wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone anymore. The pack's future would be secured, Damon's mind would be free, and they would rebuild what had been torn apart. Together. The grand hall of the pack house was filled with an uneasy energy as the entire pack gathered, murmurs of curiosity and suspicion rippling through the air. The large ornate room was lit by the flickering glow of candles, their flames dancing with the intensity of the moment. Serafina stood at the front, beside Celestine, their presence strong as they faced the room, each of them holding pieces of the truth that would shatter the lies Rosalind had spun. Damon stood slightly behind them, his eyes a mix of exhaustion and determination. He knew what was coming, but the weight of everything he had been through hung heavily on his shoulders. Serafina had explained everything to him, about Rosalind, about the betrayal, and about the bond that tied him to both her and Celestine, but it was still hard to fathom the extent of the deception. The moment Rosalind entered, the room seemed to grow still. Her steps were measured, her face serene, but there was a subtle tension in her posture, as though she knew this moment had arrived. She took her place at the center, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, a forced smile curling her lips. "What is this about?" Rosaline asked, her voice a practiced blend of concern and authority. "Why have you called us all here?" Serafina's voice rang clear, cutting through the air with the sharpness of truth. "We have proof, Rosaline," Serafina said, her gaze unwavering. "Proof of your manipulation, of the dark magic you've used to control Damon's memories and keep him from remembering what's rightfully his." She stepped forward, laying down the shaman's confession, the enchanted artifacts, and the testimonies from the pack members who had witnessed Rosalind's strange actions. Rosalind's eyes flickered momentarily, but she quickly regained her composure, a tight smile playing on her lips. "This is preposterous," Rosalind scoffed, though there was a tremor in her voice. "You're accusing me of such vile things. Serafina, you've been under strain, you've been confused, your judgment is clouded." Celestine stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Don't try to lie your way out of this, Rosalind," Celestine said, her gaze sharp. "You've manipulated Damon. You've used your power to separate him from his true mate." Rosalind's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing as she turned toward Celestine. "You," Rosalind sneered, "you have no place here. You're nothing but an outsider, an unwanted presence. You've been gone for years, and now you waltz in and claim a bond that doesn't belong to you?" The tension in the room was palpable, but Serafina could feel Damon's presence behind her, his energy still uncertain, but there was something else, a shift, a change. She glanced back at him, just as his gaze moved toward her, and in that moment, something clicked in him. His pupils dilated, his breath quickened, and his hand instinctively reached for Serafina, his fingers brushing against hers. His voice, when he finally spoke, was filled with disbelief and clarity. "Serafina," Damon's voice cracked, and Serafina could feel the powerful wave of recognition that washed over him. You're my mate. You always were." The realization hit him like a storm. His memories, long buried under layers of confusion and manipulation, began flooding back. He remembered their bond, their love, and the deep connection that had always been there, waiting for him to reclaim it. But it wasn't just Serafina. Damon's gaze shifted to Celestine, and the bond between them pulled. Different, but still undeniable. The power of the connection was raw, chaotic, but inescapable. He could feel it. He could sense it. "And you," Damon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're my mate too?" The air seemed to grow thick with the weight of his words. Rosalind's face hardened, the facade she had carefully built starting to crack. "No, no," Rosalind hissed, her voice turning sharp and filled with venom. "You're mine, Damon. You've always been mine. She is just an obstacle. She doesn't belong here." But Damon's voice, strong with the force of his true identity, cut through her words like a blade. "No, Rosalind," he said, his tone final. "You've never been my mate. You've never had control over me. Serafina, is my mate. I remember now. I've always known." Damon stepped forward, his body tense, his heart heavy with the realization that everything he had known was a lie. Rosalie's carefully constructed web of control was crumbling before him, and he was finally free to choose. Rosaline's composure shattered, and for a moment, Serafina saw the monster beneath the mask. Her eyes glowed with dark fury, and her lips twisted into a snarl. "You think you've won?" Rosaline spat, her voice low with dangerous power. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. You think you can just break my hold on him?" Before anyone could react, Rosaline raised her hand, her fingers glowing with dark energy as she attempted to cast a spell, a last-ditch effort to keep Damon under her control. She was desperate, angry, her mind shattered from the unraveling of her carefully planned manipulation. "Damon, reject her," Rosalind commanded, her voice filled with authority. "You don't belong with her. She's nothing but a lie. You know it. Reject her and come back to me." Serafina's heart pounded in her chest as she felt Damon's energy waver. His confusion, his internal battle was tearing him apart. But Celestine stepped forward, placing her hand on Serafina's arm, her eyes filled with resolve. "We need to do this together," Celestine said, her voice steady. "Let's break the spell, Serafina. For Damon, for us." Serafina nodded, her mind racing, the bond between her and Celestine surging as they stood united. The power of their shared bond, both the maternal and the mate, was unlike anything they had ever felt before. It was raw, wild, and unstoppable. Without a word, the two sisters shifted into their wolf forms. The energy around them hummed with power, and as they moved toward Damon, a surge of magic coursed through them. The ground beneath their paws trembled, the air vibrating with the raw force of their combined power. Damon's body stiffened as the energy hit him, a visceral jolt of awareness. His alpha instincts, fully awakened, surged to the surface. His connection to both Serafina and Celestine reached its peak, the bond between them threefold undeniable. With a primal roar, Damon called upon his own strength, his memories flooding back in a rush. clear, undeniable, and fierce. His alpha energy pushed against Rosaline's dark magic, shattering the last remnants of her control. "I reject you," Damon growled, his voice a command that rang out through the pack house. "I am hers, Seraphina's, always!" Rosalind screamed in fury, but it was too late. The magic was gone. Her hold was broken. The pack, witnessing the confrontation, stood in stunned silence. The truth had been exposed, and the power of the bond between Seraphina, Damon, and Celestine had become clear to them all. Rosalind's deceit had been revealed, and she was no longer a threat. Rosalind, defeated and humiliated, turned and fled, her presence vanishing into the night as she disappeared into the wilderness. The pack, witnessing the entire ordeal, slowly began to gather behind Damon and Seraphina, their support unwavering. Seraphina turned to Damon, her heart full of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of tenderness. Damon collapsed into her arms, his exhaustion taking over. "I remember," Damon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember everything." Seraphina smiled, pressing her forehead to his. "Welcome home, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of their shared relief. Celestine joined them, standing by their side. The bond between the three of them, though complex and fraught with its challenges, was unshakable. Together, they had conquered the darkness. Together, they would rebuild. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Seraphina felt like everything was right again. The past was behind them. The future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. The soft light of dawn filtered through the narrow windows of the pack's medical wing, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The quiet rustling of leaves outside mixed with the calm breathing of the man lying in the bed. Damon's eyes were closed, but Seraphina could tell he was awake. The stillness between them felt thick, as if both of them were waiting for something, some moment to bridge the gap of uncertainty that had existed between them for far too long. Seraphina stood by the window, her hand resting on the sill, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the trees. She hadn't moved much since Damon had awakened, staying by his side as he recovered, but there was something unspoken between them, a barrier built from the events of the past, his memory loss, the pain of his confusion, and the betrayal that had come from someone he trusted. Damon shifted slightly on the bed, his voice rough from the exhaustion of both physical and emotional healing. "Seraphina!" His voice broke the silence, low and filled with a vulnerability she hadn't heard in a long time. "I need to say something. Something I should have said the moment I remembered you." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. Damon's gaze was raw with emotion, his usual strength tempered by the depth of his regret. "I'm sorry," Damon continued, his voice thick with sincerity. "I failed you. I should have trusted you. Even when my memories were clouded, even when I couldn't feel the bond clearly, I should have known. You were always there. You never gave up on me. And I should have never let you feel alone in this." Seraphina's heart clenched at his words, the weight of the apology settling deeply within her. She had known that Damon's memory loss had never been intentional, but hearing him acknowledge it, the confusion, the isolation, the betrayal, made something inside her soften. Still, there was more to be said. "I never stopped feeling you in my heart," Damon whispered, his gaze intense, as if searching for something in her eyes, something she wasn't sure she could give just yet. "Even when I couldn't remember you fully, I felt it, a pull, a longing. And when you were near, I could feel that warmth, that comfort I'd always known. I was just too lost to understand it." Tears welled up in Seraphina's eyes, and she took a step toward him, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to apologize, Damon," she said, her throat tight. "I've always known you were in there. I never stopped loving you. I just had to be patient. For both of us." Damon's eyes softened, his hand reaching out toward her. She hesitated only for a moment before taking his hand in hers, the connection between them now stronger than ever. "Seraphina," Damon whispered, a mix of relief and awe in his voice. "I've always loved you. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for lost time. I'll fight for you, for us, Whatever it takes." The sincerity in his words shattered the walls Serafina had built, and without thinking, she let herself fall into his embrace. Damon wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair as he held her tightly. "You've already fought for us, Damon," she whispered, her voice muffled by his chest. "And you always will. We've made it through this. Together." For a long moment, neither of them said anything. They simply held each other, as if the world outside had fallen away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet sanctuary they had found in each other's arms. When Serafina finally pulled back slightly, she hesitated before speaking again. There was something else she needed to tell him, something that had been weighing heavily on her heart. "Damon." "There's more," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm pregnant." The words hung between them, and Damon's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He pulled back slightly, his hands gently cupping her face as he searched her eyes. "You're pregnant?" His voice was a mixture of awe and joy, the weight of the moment sinking in. Serafina nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks as she smiled softly. Damon's expression changed in an instant, from confusion to overwhelming joy. "We're going to have a child?" Damon breathed, as though the idea was both a dream and a reality all at once. He crushed her to him again, holding her with a strength that only an alpha could possess. "Yes," Serafina whispered, her heart swelling with a love she thought she had lost. "We're going to have a child, and it's ours, Damon. It's ours." Damon pulled back, his eyes glistening with emotion. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away the last of her tears as he looked at her with a depth of feeling that made her heart ache. "I don't deserve you, Serafina," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'll spend every moment of my life proving that I'm worthy of you and our family." Serafina smiled through her tears, her heart full. "We're already there, Damon. We're already together. That's all that matters." The quiet clearing at the edge of the pack territory was peaceful, the sounds of nature surrounding them as the cool breeze stirred the trees. Celestine stood at the edge, her posture stiff as she watched the distance, her mind clearly a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Serafina approached slowly, her footsteps quiet on the soft earth. She had known where to find her twin. Celestine had always been drawn to the quiet moments, the spaces where she could think, where she could process. When Celestine turned to face her, Serafina could see the rawness in her sister's eyes. The bond between them had been fractured, but it was still there, a thread connecting them even in this fragile moment. "I don't know what to do, Serafina," Celestine said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. "I can still feel the pull toward Damon, but I don't want to come between you. I never wanted to. It's just this bond between us is so strong. But I won't interfere. I can't. I won't be the reason for more heartache." Serafina stepped forward, her hand reaching out to her twin. The pain between them was palpable, but there was something else. Something that made Serafina pause. Something that whispered of healing, of a future where they could both find peace. "You don't have to choose between us, Celestine," Serafina said softly, her voice steady with resolve. "The bond you share with Damon is real, but our bond is too. It's always been. You don't have to leave, but you don't have to fight either. We can find a way to live with this, together, for the pack, for Damon, for us." Celestine's eyes softened and she let out a deep sigh. She nodded, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since she'd arrived. I think I'm finally starting to understand," Celestine said quietly. "It's not about taking something away. It's about finding a way to make this work. Together. I'll always feel the pull, but I respect what you and Damon have. I've been running from this bond for too long. Maybe it's time I stopped." Serafina smiled softly, her heart lightening as she pulled her sister into an embrace. "You don't have to run anymore, Celestine. There's space for both of us. Always." They held each other for a long moment, both women knowing that this was the beginning of something new, not just for them, but for their entire family. They would navigate this together, and together they would find peace. The pack was gathering, ready to start anew. The tension that had once divided them was dissolving, and now there was unity. Damon, Serafina, and Celestine, three people bound by fate, but also by choice, stood side by side, ready to lead the pack forward. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were in this together, and nothing, not even fate, could change that. The morning sun rose slowly, its first golden rays spilling across the land like liquid fire, casting everything in a soft glow. The pack had gathered in the ceremonial clearing, the air thick with the scent of flowers and the earthy freshness that only dawn could bring. The atmosphere was full of anticipation and joy, a collective breath held in the moments before a new beginning. Serafina stood at the center of the circle, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wore a simple but elegant gown, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders, framing her face as the wind tugged at the strands. The pack's eyes were on her, their leader, their Luna. And as Damon stood by her side, his presence was both grounding and overwhelming. The bond between them, once fractured, was now whole again, and Serafina could feel it. The strength of their connection radiated through her with every heartbeat. Damon stood tall, his eyes filled with pride as he turned to face the pack, his hand resting on Serafina's. The pack's murmurs quieted as Damon raised his voice, strong and sure, his words ringing out over the clearing. "I stand before you all, not just as your alpha, but as a man who has been given a second chance at love, at family. The woman standing beside me is not just my Luna. She is my one true mate. She is Serafina Stormbound, the heart and soul of this pack, the one who has always been with me even when I couldn't remember her. She has stood by me through everything, and today, I make it official. She is mine, and I am hers." A cheer erupted from the pack, their voices rising in unison as they celebrated the bond that had been reforged between them. Serafina felt tears spring to her eyes as Damon turned to her, his gaze soft, yet filled with unwavering love. His hand cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a stray tear as he looked at her with pure adoration. "I love you, Serafina," Damon said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "You are the heart of this pack, and I am proud to call you my mate, my Luna." Serafina smiled through her tears, her heart full as she leaned into his touch, the world around them fading into the background. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt whole. She felt right. "I love you too, Damon," Serafina replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I'm so proud to stand by your side." The crowd cheered again, and Damon stepped forward, raising his arms to the sky as the pack erupted into celebration. It wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a new one. A new era for the pack, free from the shadows of Rosalind's lies, filled with hope and unity. Serafina stood tall beside him, her heart swelling with pride as the pack's cheers filled the air. She was home. She was where she belonged. Later that afternoon, Serafina and Damon walked together through her garden, the air warm and fragrant with the sense of blooming flowers and fresh earth. The peace of the moment was a stark contrast to everything that had come before, the chaos, the uncertainty, and the betrayal. Now there was only the promise of a new life, a fresh start, and the shared hope for a future filled with love. Serafina's hand rested gently on her growing belly, a subtle yet significant gesture. She could feel the life inside her, the connection to Damon that had always been a part of her, growing stronger with each passing day. Damon's hand joined hers, his fingers wrapping around hers, and they shared a quiet moment, taking in the serenity of the world around them. "I can't believe how much has changed in such a short time," Serafina said, her voice soft but filled with awe. "It feels like a dream, Damon. To have you here, to be standing beside you, knowing that we're building something new, something ours." Damon smiled at her, his gaze tender, his love for her clear in the way he looked at her, as if she were his entire world. He stepped closer, his hand still on her belly, feeling the warmth between them, the deep connection that bound them together. "I never want to take this for granted," Damon said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "We've been through too much to not cherish every moment. This baby, our family, you're everything to me, Serafina." Tears welled up in Serafina's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest as he held her close. "And you're everything to me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so grateful for this, for us. We'll give our child a life filled with love and strength, Damon, a future we can be proud of." Damon kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her tightly. "And I'll be here, every step of the way, to make sure it's the best life we can give them," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'll protect you both, Serafina, always." A soft rustling interrupted their quiet moment, and Serafina turned to see Celestine standing at the edge of the garden, watching them with a wistful smile. The bond between them, though complicated, had been mended in the quiet moments they'd shared. There was no longer the sting of rivalry, no longer the tension that had once divided them. They had found a place for each other in this new family, this new beginning. Celestine approached, her footsteps quiet on the soft grass. She looked at Serafina and Damon with a gentle, sincere smile. "I never imagined it would be like this," Celestine said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. "But I'm glad to see you both so happy, and I promise I'll protect this family, our family, as part of it." Serafina smiled, her heart swelling with warmth as she reached out to her twin sister. "Thank you, Celestine. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're part of this. I know it's been hard, but we'll find our way through it. Together." Celestine nodded, her expression bittersweet. "I'll stay close," she said, her voice a mix of strength and vulnerability. "For now, I'll stay close, but someday I think I'll need to find my own path, a place where I can figure out what's next." Damon looked between the two women, his gaze filled with understanding. "Whatever path you choose, Celestine, we'll be here," he said, his voice warm. "This is your family, too." The three of them stood there for a long moment, the peaceful vista before them stretching out across the land, the future ahead of them uncertain but full of promise. Together they would face whatever came next, united in love, in family, in strength. Damon had returned from the depths of uncertainty to a love that was solid and unwavering. Serafina had found the courage to open her heart again. And Celestine, though unsure of where her path would lead, had found a place in their hearts, a place where she could stand alongside them, as part of the family, as part of the pack. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting its final golden rays across the land, they all knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, with love, hope, and a future that was theirs to shape. The darkest chapter had passed. Now, the dawn of a hopeful future had arrived.